Hello everyone. I'm glad to see you on my channel. The story I'm going to tell you today is pure. It is true that all the bad things that happen in life happen for a reason. It is said that we can appreciate the good things, the things when they happen to us. I hope you enjoy this story. I wish you a pleasant viewing experience.
Oscar and Penelope were married a long time ago, over 10 years ago. From the outside, they seemed to be an ideal family with 3 children. Husband, a successful businessman. Wife, the ideal hostess and mother. An honor student son. 2 twin girls, beauties. What more could one want for happiness? About the true state of affairs knew only Penelope. Before marriage, she managed to get a good economic education. In addition, she knew that her vocation to do business. Succeeding in this, she was engaged in it. The prosperity of their family and the growth of her husband's company were mainly her merit. But all the praise went to Oscar, and the profits were in his hands. Penelope did not mind, did not want to lower her husband's self-esteem. She saw how happy and proud he was of his successes. And what is her prerogative? House and household, and the upbringing of the children, of course. True, even in this was not so simple. And her husband's attitude towards her achievements was not always happy. Oscar never wanted to have many children. So when the eldest son Morgan was born, he was sure that he would stop there. But Penelope really dreamed of a daughter. When she told her husband about it, he dismissed it. And when she told him she was expecting her second, he was extremely unhappy. Do or what? Nothing to do. With one is only a hassle. You need a second, he grumbled. But Oscar, it will be a girl. I'm sure you'll see how happy it is to have a daughter. Yes, all men dream of a daughter, rejoiced Penelope. Someone maybe in dreams? But I, for example, I dream in the evenings after work to relax and not listen to children's cries, he wrinkled. What screams? Very soon the child will grow up, and there will be no more screams, only joy. I can imagine these joys, especially when the girl grows up and starts to go out with gentlemen. Oh well, what can I do? You cannot argue with you, said the husband unhappily. And Penelope fulfilled his dream as not just, and even with excess, gave birth to twins. Husband, meeting her from the hospital, congratulated, and even praised, well done, you've got me. For whatever you undertake, and all the return is double. Well, at least such praise. True, in general, her husband did not spoil her with kind words. On the contrary, and considered himself, and others made it clear that his wife is unspeakably lucky with him. Lives on everything ready-made, no worries, do not know. Why? After all business matters have to decide he, a man, the father of the family. Penelope did not argue, uncomplainingly dealt with the documents brought home, in which the husband did not understand anything. During working hours, sometimes she even annoyed at him. I do not understand what you then at work. If such a simple question could not solve, she wondered and immediately received an answer. Easy for you to say at home. Maybe such a question is easy to solve. But at work you run so much that they will ask you how much is 2 times 2, and you do not know. I don't have time to go home. I need to rest. Do you have time? Take a look. And in the morning you pick up the finished documents, I say condescendingly. But good for you. I knew you'd figure it out in 5 minutes. Although there wasn't much to do there. Agree? Penelope sighed, agreed, and went to do their household chores. Over time, she increasingly clearer realized her family life is not as good as desired and as it is seen by others. Her husband increasingly neglected both her and the children. In their relationship, they began to have some kind of cooling. At first, Penelope habitually blamed herself. Probably, after all, I'd given too much to realize my superiority. So he takes offense, she thought, and tried to soften the situation. But it didn't work very well. Mainly because Oscar was getting farther and farther away. That he had a mistress, his wife did not realize for a long time. But she did. At first, Oscar thought that he was just due to his status of a young, beautiful companion, and it has nothing to do with his wife or family. He simply has a mistress, and it is normal. Penelope will not know about it, and those around him, if they do know, will only approve of this behavior. After all, he in no way oppresses his spouse, does not harm the family. Just meets with a young woman, that's all. But over time, this woman, Scarlett, completely captured his attention and heart, and was not averse to taking possession of his wallet. That is, she made it quite her own. Sometimes on dates, sometimes jokingly, and sometimes very seriously, she talked about it. Look, we've been together so long. You want to keep me as your mistress forever? Will you never leave your many children? The kids will still be yours. You'll see them. Pay child support. Support them. Well, maybe you're right, Oscar replied thoughtfully. I'm sure you're right. But, it would be a big disadvantage for his reputation. He's left his wife with 3 children. Such a thing may not be forgiven in our circles. Oh, don't be silly. It's not the old days people leave their families and feel fine. No one condemns anyone, especially since everyone will see who you left her for. Admit it, I look much better than your wife. But you're entitled to your status. Young, beautiful, and the current wife let her live, quietly bring up your children. No one's forbidding it. Oh, Scarlett, don't talk about what you don't understand, Oscar dared to say one day. It's not about children, not in conscience, not in reputation in business. She Penelope, although officially and does not work with me, but something in this business understands. And I have a lot of things tied to her. What do you mean? Even from me, your mistress. Are you saying your business is really hers? No, he laughed, of course not. The business is mine. There's nothing to talk about. It's just that she knows a little something about it, too, and she helps me with things sometimes. I'm used to it. I don't often have time for the little things myself. So I just leave some things to her. Not very important, but still necessary operations she does well. And if we get divorced, I won't have that kind of help. I mean, you wouldn't be able to run the business. No, I'm not meant for that, Scarlett answered capriciously. But I'm sure you say that because you don't love me and you're not going to leave your wife. Are you just deceiving me? Are you using me? No, I'm not. But what I'm telling you is that my relationship with my wife is purely business, and she knows it. So you're telling me you don't know anything about business and you can't make a move without her? Do you go to my place with her permission too? What are you talking about? What's wrong with you today? What's wrong with me is that you won't do anything for me. So you can gaze and rest and get out of my house. I don't need that kind of lover. I need a safe, secure life. And I'm sitting here like a fool waiting for you. And I'm satisfied with some trifling gifts. But you know, Scarlett, they ain't nothing. And then someday, well, maybe. When I retire, you'll be dead by then. I'm much younger than you, in case you've forgotten. That's it. If you don't want to live with me, you don't have to come at all. It's okay. Goodbye to you. I'll find Frank another reliable, confident man who won't give me up with some silly argument. You see, he doesn't know much about business. Yes, I understand everything, but it's a very difficult business indeed. Any fool is in business nowadays, and nobody's going out of business. And you, who's already got a very profitable business, suddenly you say you depend on your wife for everything. That's ridiculous. What's ridiculous? Business is complicated. Yeah, I bet if you gave half your business to any hobo off the street, he could handle it just as well as your beautiful wife. Oh, don't be silly. I'm sick of you calling me stupid so many times in one day. It's amazing. Of course, I'm always saying stupid things. I'm not as smart as this, dear Penelope. And what's her name? She gave birth to 3 children and also runs your business while you're out with the ladies. How many of us do you have? Well, let me count. Well, I love only you. Okay, if you do, let's do an experiment. Let's give your business to some stranger and see if it's hard or not. It's no big deal. Even if it doesn't work out, your wife can fix it. You, of course, it is not possible. But Penelope's 7 inches in the forehead. Oscar at first took this conversation as a joke, but then he realized Scarlett meant it. Moreover, she has already agreed to break off the relationship if he refuses. But he wasn't ready to break up. You can't break up with someone like that. But so easily give his business, or even part of it, even for a while, for a month, in the hands of an unknown person, at the risk of losing everything. Naturally, he was not ready for that. On the other hand, Scarlett, though she really didn't know much about business, was right. An unskilled man is a good thing because he won't do much harm. It might even do him, Oscar, some good. And Scarlett, having lost this dispute, will calm down for a while, will stop threatening to break up. And then maybe he'll cool off a little. And maybe he'll find another beauty, more cooperative. There's been a lot of worrying going on. But with the damage that will cause John Doe some business, Penelope can easily cope. She really is a skillful, intelligent woman. There's nothing to be said for that. And he always appreciated her business acumen. Only thought that to let her know about it is not necessary at all, or else it will be conceited. Putting part of your business in the wrong hands is not a good idea. Even with such good intentions, it's a little scary. I'll tell you that. But Scarlett just kept pushing. So are you scared? You realize I'm right? You, my dear, overestimated yourself, of course. Come on, enough of these jokes. It is your strangers do not have the guts to take away my business, said Oscar. And in the end, yielding to the persuasions of his mistress and his own desire for a little rest, he decided to accept Scarlett's proposal. Just where to get that first person was the only question that bothered him. Still with a sneer, he asked Scarlett the question. But the first one isn't the first one. That's what I said. You just have to take someone young, not yet down. But you don't want some dirty tramp in your firm, do you? Quite seriously, she said, businesslike. Of course I do. But where should I look for this decent tramp? Yes, there's a young guy who's been hanging around here for a while now. He looks all right. I thought of him right away, Scarlett said. And where did you meet this normal-looking hobo? Oscar frowned jealously. Oh, come on. He was changing a tire at my car. Don't think I'm going to get involved with any tramps. I just talked to him, too. I asked him how he was doing without a job and all that. But he doesn't look like the type. Wash him, change his clothes, he'd look like a human being. So you're going to take him as your replacement. Well, only if you patronize me. But watch out, if he messes up my case, you'll be responsible. I can be relentless, jokingly attacked her lover. And so, jokingly, he made a deed which a reasonable man would hardly dare, transferred part of his business and the management of a completely unknown guy. It must be said that the latter did not agree immediately. At first, he didn't even believe that he was offered such a strange occupation. What kind of business is this? I've never run a business before. What do you have to do? Well, I understand you could be a security guard or, say, a courier. I could do that. You know, if it works out, I'll take you as a delivery boy or whatever you want. But right now, you have to play the big boss. After all, you're not stupid, convinced and businessman. Can you read right? No numbers and letters. That's all. And maybe my competitors will not like it so much, laughed Oscar. And he offered him a pretty good fee for a month of such work. Plus, he gave him money in advance to change his clothes, because it is necessary to portray a decent man in a decent form. All right, agreed the boy. I'll be a businessman for a while. But if something goes wrong, it's not my fault, and I won't be responsible for anything. You won't, don't worry. Nothing terrible will happen there. Oscar was really sure of it. Besides, he wanted a break from the routine. And Scarlett had convinced him to take a vacation for a week or two and go somewhere for a longer period of time. Oscar couldn't understand. He still had a wife to answer. He told her that he was going on a business trip to meet with his partners. And strangely enough, she believed him. I mean, she took offense. How can you go at a time like this? You know, Morgan's going on vacation. I mean, we were all supposed to go on vacation together. And now it turns out you're going alone. But we'll go together later. It's just that there's a window at work right now. It's okay if I disappear for a week, and then I'll join you guys. Maybe. But I don't see any reason to be offended at all. I don't have vacations, and business is always business. Well, in general, you know, Penelope, as always, understood everything. And he left with his mistress. Their Scarlett again began to be naughty. Why only for a week? Well, yes, I understand you're afraid for your business, and I have to accept it this time too. It's a lot worse to lose your business than it is to lose me. What am I to you? Some mistress, it's not hard to find another one. I do not know what else I have to do for you. Oscar waved his hands. Your rather strange request I fulfilled. I entrusted the business to someone unknown. How it is managed there now, no one knows. But I keep my promise. In case you've forgotten it, I said I wouldn't meddle in business for a month, so I won't. I just need to get home. We agreed. We're only going for a week. I don't know who you made a deal with. Look at the weather. But why can't we stay longer? Scarlett wouldn't let it go. Of course they could stay longer. But, first of all, Oscar knew not to make his wife too angry. And secondly, he was worried about his own business too. He was not going to interfere in the actions of the new manager, but still thought that at least from afar it was worth watching what was happening. When he returned home, he was surprised to see how things were going. The surprise was both pleasant and unpleasant at the same time. Things were going fine. But why? After all, he had left the business to a man who was practically a stranger, a vagrant, unprepared to deal with them. He started asking Scarlett questions. Look, what do you know about this young man? I don't think he's quite who he says he is. I told you, I don't know anything. Well, his name is Edward. He changed a tire on his car. "That's good. That's all I know," she replied. "He's very good at what he does. He obviously has some knowledge and experience. But I didn't check his diploma. I'm not a policeman nor a fortune teller. Maybe he has knowledge. Or maybe your whole business is such a piece of crap that any first grader could handle it. You're just covering up your business so you can run away from your wife, May, too." Scarlett began to talk to him differently. Yes, and in general, he noticed that despite fulfilling all her whims, she clearly wanted to break off the relationship. And that would not be the greatest misfortune in his life. But Oscar finally noticed that the business was being taken away from him. And this was more serious. So serious that at one not very beautiful moment he realized that he simply, as they call it, circled around the finger. He no longer had any business, for the man to whom he had voluntarily handed it over, having signed all the papers, was not some Edward who could change tires on cars, but a man with a good and more than one economic education. And Scarlett was none other than Edward's mistress and faithful assistant. It was urgent to save something, but Oscar realized with horror that there was nothing to save in the faithful assistant. That is, Penelope was not around. By the time his wife and children returned from vacation, Oscar had no business left. He filed a lawsuit, although he understood perfectly well, to win it he has no chance. And so he did. The lawyer thumbed through the papers and shrugged his shoulders. "But please, these are your signatures. You gave everything to Edward yourself. I don't know what I can do about it." When Penelope returned, she didn't recognize her husband, so dead he looked. When she heard the reason for his mood, she was horrified. She started to deal with it, but he convinced her that there was a raider seizure. It is not his fault, but just tried two clever people. "You can see how badly I feel, Penelope. Please, let's just close the subject for a little while. I thought I was going to have a heart attack," Oscar moaned sincerely, almost dying from all this. "Yes, I can see that you look terrible," his wife agreed. "But what to do now? We must fight. Chances to return, at least part of the business is there." "And probably not. I've done everything I can, and you shouldn't get involved. I don't want it to get any worse. You'll have to accept it, Penelope." How much worse, she sighed. "Well, okay, I will not go anywhere. But on what money we will live? Morgan's going to school. The girls are all grown up. We don't have any savings. What are we gonna do? Sell our stuff? I don't know, maybe it'll come down to this work. Then I'll go. I don't see any other way out, but not now. It's summer. I want to rest, I just can't pack now." "And you see," said Penelope, "I think that now you do not need to get a job and in the hospital to lie down to recover." Penelope guessed that the case is not just in the raider's seizure, that her husband's fault in what happened, but did not begin to understand. And even if completely guilty Oscar, then to fix it all the same will not be able to do anything. But I did not want to spoil relations with her husband, although it would seem that there's nothing to spoil. So some time passed. The situation did not improve, and the husband did not hurry to look for a job. "Well," said finally Penelope, "let's then all get a job, and you stay home and watch the kids." This option of development of events Oscar very much pleased. "Okay, Penelope, I'm glad you offered. It's true, I'm in no condition to work for hire right now." He felt that not just at the moment is not able, he cannot at all. He had the education, but little or no business skills. Going to work, pretending to be a boss, that suited him fine. but to work himself with his hands and still obey someone else's orders. Oh, Penelope works. Homework seemed to Oscar not work, but a vacation. The children, fortunately, are no longer so tiny. The eldest is 10, the girls are 5. That is quite independent. Send them to school and kindergarten, in the evening to meet them, feed them, turn on the TV. Yes, anyone can do it. About the fact that a person engaged in housekeeping should still cook his own food, buy groceries, do the cleaning, he somehow did not think. His shopping trips were a disaster for the family budget. He just took whatever he could get his hands on. He brought home heavy bags, and then it turned out that there was nothing to eat. There was everything that was suitable only for fancy appetizers. Why didn't you buy meat, potatoes, vegetables? I gave you a list, surprised Penelope in the evenings, coming from work. Well, how could not buy? Here you bought, confused husband said. Yes, some bought. This is not something that children and adults cannot eat. Canned food, smoked food. What are you going to make soup out of? Porridge. Jen, do I have to cook it? No, honey, cooking is a woman's job. I've never done anything like that. I don't know how, and I don't want to learn. Well, if you're going to do the housework, you're going to have to cook. I'm very tired at work, and when I come home, what do I see? The kids are hungry. The place is a mess. It's a woman's job to clean, do the laundry. At the kindergarten, they complain that you bring the girls in dirty clothes, not well groomed, pick them up later than everyone else. And last week, the teacher had to take the girls home herself. Why are you acting like this? Because I didn't have time. I got tired and fell asleep, So you didn't get them home on time once. It wouldn't kill your teachers to spend an extra hour with your kid. And Morgan's teacher's kind of weird. But we don't want to stay home with Dad. Let him work, and you'll be with us as usual, Morgan complained later. And don't let him come to school with me. He embarrassed me so bad. He yelled at the teacher, said she had to treat me special somehow. Now the kids are laughing at me, and the teacher's not happy either. Yes, let's let you come with us and take me to daycare. Dad's always late. And last time he brought us later than everyone else and yelled at the teacher because the door was closed. She even cried afterwards and told Daddy not to come anymore. Let Mommy come. Penelope realized the children are absolutely right. And the husband is absolutely not capable of neither household to lead, nor children to bring up. But what was she to do? Work she found very good and promising. Everyone was happy with her. The salary was decent. That her husband will find something similar, and most importantly, will successfully work there, she not without reason doubted. But things couldn't go on like this either. The children were practically abandoned. Everything could end badly. All his educational methods were limited to the fact that he sat them in front of the TV, put a pile of sweets in front of them, and told them to sit quietly. If he broke that order, he'd yell. Penelope herself got a job in a very solid firm as a senior manager. Education allowed to count on a quick promotion, and the chief soon noticed her talents. Felix in general was a man smart, perceptive, and once, discussing with her next work issues, asked, "What about your husband's business?" It turned out that way. Resonant case was in business circles. A lot of stories about it. Penelope began to recount the story from Oscar's words, talk about the raid or seizure and so on. But the boss said, Yes, no, I heard another version. Your husband gave the company almost in the hands of a complete stranger. He didn't waste any time. That's what happened. Pretty reckless of him. And here's the weird thing. You didn't quit your job because of him, did you? Penelope was confused. I do not know what to say. Felix realized that she simply was deceived. Husband decided not to develop this topic, but Penelope herself decided to talk about it with her husband. Coming home and seeing, as usual, a complete ruin, tried to find out what really happened. Sort of most importantly, when her husband will finally become, after all, a real master of the house, if he could not become a businessman. But Oscar, exhausted by idleness and insulting for a man's title of housewife, was not going to justify himself. So you think I'm a bad husband, and you think you'd left me a perfect household. Yes, everything was trashed without me. The children are not well-mannered. Did you keep me busy? They don't obey at all. They're naughty all day long. I was a bad businessman. What would you know about it? Your ceiling is accounting, working for the boss, and you can't do anything on your own. You're not a good hostess, and I've been scolded. I'm not scolding you. I'm just asking, who did you give our farm to and on what grounds? I gave it to the right person. It was my business. You had nothing to do with it. And, realizing there was no way to dodge, Oscar blurted out, and if you don't like it, I can leave. Well, go away. It seems that no one will cry for you here. I don't have the strength to carry everything on my shoulders anymore. You're all bad. The kid's me. You're the only good one. You can't make sense of what you're doing. You can't make sense of anything. You're the one hanging around my neck. That's it, not anymore. I want to divorce you myself, Oscar raged. And very well. Just be aware we will not share the apartment. You don't get anything here. No, Lamoni, if you're interested. I know it's useless. I don't care about your apartment. Who needs it? Oscar understood. His situation is unenviable. But at that moment, it seemed that there was nothing worse than to remain living in the house in the position of a male housewife, which all dissatisfied. Let her fend for herself with her children and her household, while she worked and did everything. But he will still come up, and she will still cry and call him back, but it'll be too late. He won't think of forgiving such humiliation. After Oscar finally left the family, Penelope had to urgently look for a nanny. That's how Michelle appeared in our house. A young, modest girl. She didn't have much experience. But Penelope liked the fact that at least she did not hide it, and said that she was capable and wanted to learn everything. There's really no experience with other people's children. But I am, after all, the oldest of 4 children in the family, so I've been babysitting since I was 5 years old. Don't doubt that I'll do it. If something doesn't work out or it's not the way you want it to be, you just say so. I am very easy to adjust to a new way. Penelope was pleased to have such an assistant and decided that now the domestic problems are finally solved. Now the children would be under supervision. And at first it was like that. Although Susan and Tara didn't like the nanny very much. She doesn't play with us. She just scolds us and puts us in the corner. We don't want to be in the corner. Maybe you've been misbehaving, but that's okay. You'll get used to it and everything will be fine. I think Michelle is very nice. And I do not even know what you are dissatisfied, answered the mother. For the first time for a long time, received the opportunity to really relax at home. Ah, Michelle, I am so glad that I found you, said Penelope to the nanny. She, taking advantage of the good attitude of the mistress, began to feel in charge of the house. After a while, Penelope noticed that Michelle is already on her and shouts, and constantly complains that the mistress leaves little money for groceries and all necessary things, although Penelope knew how to count much better than the housekeeper. In the end, she realized Michelle is not just misappropriating some of the money given to the household, but also launches his hand into the money box. And this was completely unacceptable. She did not want to scandalize and Slay calculated the nanny. But in this way she was again left without help. Michelle had to be fired in one day. It was not so easy to find another nanny with housekeeping duties. A retired neighbor, Riley, came to the rescue. Penelope knew her from her years as a school teacher. But now Grandma lived alone. Her son, his family had gone abroad, visited his mother rarely. Their communication had become mostly virtual, and the old woman, accustomed to talking to someone, was lonely. Meeting and talking in the yard with Penelope, she sympathized with her and suggested, "So, Penelope, let me be the day while you are at work. Look after the guys. I can cook and help Morgan with lessons, explain what is not clear, and maybe clean up if necessary. I've got a head on my shoulders too, and mental work, helps keep my vitality up. Oh, I'd be very grateful to you, and I'll pay for everything." "Of course, do not worry," Penelope rejoiced, knowing about the neatness and conscientiousness of the former teacher. "But this is not necessary. I, Penelope's services, do not trade, and in money do not need. The pension is enough. In addition, my son still sends a little. I myself can pay you for giving me the opportunity to understand the guys. After all, communicating with them, I myself get younger. The children were not averse to spend time with friendly and intelligent grandmother." Penelope had free time and confidence that everything was fine with her son and daughters. But that didn't last long. Yes, the legs and arms did not bother. Riley has a bright head, but here the heart failed the elderly woman at the most inopportune moment. So one afternoon, when she brought the girls home from daycare and Morgan from school and fed them lunch, she suddenly felt sick, and the pills she needed had been left at home. It didn't seem like much of a problem, the apartment next door. But Riley suddenly felt she couldn't get up. Her heart was in unbearable pain. She couldn't get enough air, and there were only little kids around. Morgan was doing his homework in his room. With difficulty, she called out to one of her sisters, "Susan, get Morgan." She decided that the boy, the oldest at the time, would be able to help her. The girls, realizing that the matter was bad, rushed to their brother in tears. "Morgan, Grandma's in a bad way. She's pale and breathing hard." The frightened boy rushed to his sister's room and saw Riley in the most terrible condition. She was about to lose consciousness. With a relaxed hand, she pulled the key to her apartment out of her pocket. She wanted to tell him how to open the door, where to get the medicine, but the key fell out of her powerless fingers. Her eyes closed, and she lost consciousness. With trembling hands, Morgan called an ambulance, explained what had happened, and asked his sisters to call his mother. But he sat down on the floor and fell into a strange stupor. Penelope realized from her daughter's call that something terrible was going on at home. She arrived just as Riley was being rushed to the hospital with a heart attack, amid the cries of the children. "Where's Morgan?" asked the terrified mother. "And he's in the apartment," the paramedic replied grimly. He was in shock. "You shouldn't leave children with barely alive grandmothers. I gave him a shot now." Penelope rushed into the apartment. Morgan slept perfectly calm at first glance. But how could the shock really turn out? Turns out, the sight of a dying woman didn't go unnoticed by the boy. He woke up, looked almost the same as always, but looked past those who spoke to him. He didn't respond to the words. Penelope was going through the most difficult time of her life. She couldn't quit her job, nor could she find a nanny for the girls, and she was afraid to get involved with anyone. Thrown between the office, kindergarten, home, hospital, after all had to hospitalize. But not for long. The physical condition of the boy did not inspire concern, and mental too. Yes, he didn't speak, but his basic reactions were normal. This condition could last for any length of time, although everything can improve at any time, the doctor reassured. "Well, I guess we can't wait. We have to treat it," Penelope exclaimed. "Absolutely. But it is not necessary to be in the hospital and take a seat. Do not worry, everything is remediable." "Well, how not to worry if your child's smart, healthy boy, after the experience cannot talk, We started going to doctors, to the best and most expensive specialists, and all to no avail. Penelope was exhausted. She was on the edge. One evening, driving through the city, she noticed an elderly man wandering down the street. He looked like a vagrant, and there was such hopelessness and resignation to fate in his whole figure. "Hello," she approached the stranger. "Let me invite you to my house. It's cold now. You probably need to warm up." Grandpa looked at her with unhappy but clear eyes, but he couldn't say anything. Apparently his lips were frozen. He let himself into the car, but he looked completely uncomprehending. When we got to the house, he asked, "Who are you and why did you take me off the street?" "Call of the heart. I just felt it was the right thing to do, that's all." "I hope that's enough," Penelope smiled. "It is enough. However, why or why not is not important, and I like your explanation better than any other." Penelope saw that the man was not well. It is clear that he has been wandering the streets for a long time. He's old, he's hungry. But more than that, he's suffering from a grief he's been unable to cope with, and that's the reason for his present condition. She sat him down in the kitchen, explained to the children who had come out to greet him that he was their guest. "Hello," the girl said quietly. Morgan stared at him in silence. The incident with Riley had kept him so mute. From his daughters, silent. Now the children could be left home alone without fear or worry for them. Penelope sat her grandfather down at the table, warmed up the food, set it in front of him. "Thank you, honey. I thought, that's it, the end has come." "No, there was a good angel for me," said the guest. "I don't know what I could pay for all this." "Neither do I, but it seems to me that our acquaintance is not accidental. You're not a bad man yourself, by all accounts. Something tells me I am. I guess you just ran into something bad. And what's your name?" "I'm Penelope," she answered. "Penelope, can we you?" "Yes, once was not a bad man and did not take bribes. And my name was Casper. But it was a long time ago, in a past life. A lot of things have changed since then, and I've become what I've become, a tramp and a bum. In general, Grandpa is my nickname among my new colleagues for collecting glassware and metal. Not without humor, you'll agree." "You can call me that too," he replied. "What is this nonsense? I don't collect glassware to make jokes like that. Since you are a Dr. Casper, maybe give me a little advice. With son trouble." So Penelope told him what happened to Morgan. Actually, at his age, that doesn't happen very often. And treatment, I agree, is not easy. But I hope your case isn't the most difficult. I've looked at the boy, and it appears he's suffering from his own condition. So there's no brain damage. They can image a fart data. Penelope liked that answer. Grandfather did not promise her a quick, 100% cure. In fact, he was just being trustworthy. Even Casper had been surprised when she'd offered to stay the night. "Are not you too trusting, Penelope?" "I have such a flaw, but I think not in your case. I've been burned a few times lately, but the fact that I trust you, it seems to me right. And I don't have the strength to do it alone. I'm alone with 3 kids and a lot of problems. So you see, I'm not so selfless." Penelope smiled. "Who of us worse?" "That's another question. Maybe I suffer for the cause." "You doctor said," replied Grandpa. "I too have made many mistakes because of my character. Helping others to solve their problems, I let mine go to waste, and I ended up where I am. I don't want to be intrusive, but still, how is it? You're an intelligent man, doctor, obviously without bad habits. I'm sorry." Penelope was really uncomfortable questioning the new acquaintance, but she wondered how he could be so low. Casper apparently understood everything and was not offended. On the contrary, he was expecting such a question.
"Mercy, Penelope, you and picked me up on the street, brought to your house where your children live, put at your table and apologize. I would be surprised, worried, if you had not asked this question. However, The answer is simple gullibility, unwillingness to enter into conflicts, inability to build relationships with the most dear people. My first wife died right after my son Dustin was born. I never thought about another marriage.
As long as my mom was alive, she helped. She basically took over Dustin's upbringing. But when he was 10, she was gone. It's hard for a father to raise a kid alone, so he started looking for a wife. And of course he found one. Guess which one? Young beauty, probably, smiled sadly Penelope. Well, no, such I was not looking for. I needed first and foremost a mother for my son. 2 years later, I married Audrey. Good, kind, caring, wonderful hostess and widow. Mother of Kevin's boy, 2 years younger than mine. I thought they'd grow up like two brothers, be friends. But what happened? It was either those 2 years too far apart or childish jealousy. I don't know, the boys didn't get along. Besides, they're different ages and different personalities, and Kevin didn't treat me the best. Maybe that's why they fought so much, and I didn't always behave right. I discounted my son, I stood up for my adopted son. Well, then they grew up. Dustin went to college, and when he was in his penultimate year, he disappeared. He wanted to be a biologist too. I talked him out of it. By then, our relationship hadn't exactly soured, but it had gotten cooler. So he went on some expeditions and disappeared without a trace. His wife had died by then. Her son had done his best to get on our nerves. She had a heart condition, so it was just me and him. Kevin realized you can't just kill me like that. He literally started to mock me. I ended up with no apartment and no roof over my head. How could you do that? With indignation exclaimed Penelope. After all, you had all the rights were. It was necessary to fight. There are lawyers, the courts are, everything is. But the forces are not. There are times when there is no hope. Sometimes it's easier to die than to start a scandal. And now what? It wasn't yesterday. For 10 years I've been living with one hope, to see my son. For some reason I believe that he's alive, that he'll come back. I understand hope. But they searched for him. Then they declared him dead, though no one saw him alive or dead. That's what gives me hope. They leaned over the table, as if looking at the patterns on the tablecloth. Her grandfather's sad tale touched Penelope to the core. I don't know what I can do to help you, Penelope said at a loss. You have already helped. Perhaps now it is time to sleep. Late already. Tomorrow I will see your Morgan. Penelope looked at Casper with hopeful eyes full of tears. She went to make his bed. In the morning, the guest took care of the problem. Casper read the other doctor's conclusions, agreed with some, not so much with some. And then he examined the boy himself and, oh wonder, the boy made his first sound in a long time. So far, however, nothing meaningful but quite realized. That's good, but it's only the beginning of a long journey. There's a lot of work to be done. The elderly doctor had to stay at Penelope's house to study with Morgan, which everyone was only happy.
Penelope began to leave a new acquaintance without fear and with the younger daughters. The girls were very happy. Soon they began to call him Grandpa and said that with him much better than with evil little and old grandmother Riley.
He's so much fun to be with. He is also engaged with us. Daughters told alternately daughters returned from work Penelope. And he will not get sick, like Grandma Riley. Yes, no, said the mother, herself somehow sure of it. And things were not going well at work. Well, that is not her, but the owner of the company. Penelope at some point clearly realized he threatened trouble no less than happened with Oscar's business. And that is, the problems are much more serious, and the firm is much larger, and conspiracy conceived not greedy girl and her beau, and people much more dangerous. One thing that Felix, such an experienced and intelligent man, did not notice anything, already says something. Maybe Penelope would not have noticed the danger, but she had a sad experience, and she rather did not see, but felt something wrong. Thanks to this, the conspiracy was uncovered. The intruders instead of the firm and income got what they deserved, and Felix did not know how to thank his employee. Penelope, I owe you my life. This firm for me everything. If I lost it, God forbid, I would not want to live. Believe me, ask for what you want. You want an apartment, children abroad for treatment, studies, vacations, anything you ask. But come on, Felix, I don't need anything. My children are small, I can't send them away alone. The company without supervision, now also afraid to leave, joked Penelope, but then immediately regained, unless you seem to have good connections with law enforcement. There are investigators different, or I do not know what you need specialists. Yes, any will find. Penelope, you from under the ground, any criminal will pull out of the ground, and in any prison will put. Felix was clearly in a blow. No, no, no. Such services are not needed. I need to find a man who disappeared many years ago without a trace, and even declared dead. But there may be hope that he's alive. That is, if it is possible that he is. The warden grew serious, but not because he was going to say no. You know I'm not a detective, but I can find one, and the best. You'll need the exact details of this man, photographs preferably, and anything else you know. I can't say that quickly, but I think he'll be at your feet. So Penelope hurried home to find out from Casper everything about his missing son. Alas, the grandfather's papers were almost non-existent. Foster son tried, but his memory was strong. So Penelope wrote down everything he could tell her about his son's disappearance. She thought about it, at the same time to ask for Felix's lawyers to find out if he could get his apartment back. After all, the actions of Kevin's adopted son cannot be left unpunished, and took up the case. But I don't think it will be possible to get anything out of Kevin. I asked only for Morgan without even mentioning it. That's all that matters to me. If I can at least convince him to find out something, that's good enough for me. I'm willing to live my whole life in the open air for that.
The next day, Felix was very active. Although both he and his experts did not promise quick results, but hope still lingered, and Penelope had her own joy. Morgan had begun to speak. It was a great joy. After all, she had almost despaired, and even the doctors she'd seen before were surprised at the result. They had only hoped for a partial recovery of speech.
Casper waited. He didn't hope for a quick result either, but he was so anxious to hear something. Poor father, Penelope thought. I don't even know whether it would be better to find my son alive or not. For if he is alive and comes here, I'll have him by the hair. But where is this scene? Abandoning a father in such a state. But it wasn't what they thought it would be. Dustin was found. He'd gotten lost on an expedition up north. He fell and suffered a serious injury that would have probably killed him. But as luck would have it, he was found by the locals. They brought him to the house of a local witch doctor. He took care of the young man for several months, who did not regain consciousness for a long time. Then it turned out that he almost completely lost his memory. But even when Dustin did come to his senses and remembered everything, he still would not be able to get to civilization. The injuries to his head and spine had almost completely immobilized him. The healer never gave up his efforts, but he wasn't sure the boy would ever walk again. Over the years, however, he did get around on crutches and still did not ask to be sent home. What's the use of a cripple there, he thought. Father's not young anymore. He has an adopted son. Even though Kevin was a complete scoundrel in his youth, maybe he's reformed, helping his father. And if not, there's really no reason for me to be there. I'll be a burden to my dad, and Kevin will only make fun of me. I'd rather stay here, where I'm used to, where good people are used to me. And I'm at ease here. He may have regretted his decision, But the longer he lived in the wilderness, the more terrifying it was to return to his old life. Even when they found him and sent a helicopter, Dustin was hesitant, reluctant to go home, afraid, especially after learning of all the circumstances. Well, am I going to go? I mean, it's embarrassing. I thought my father was doing well. I'd only ruin his life. And now I won't. He has so many problems. Here I am still, he thought. But where to go? He went. He was tired of loneliness and the unsettledness of life. And there Penelope in full began to solve the issue with the apartment Casper. It was easier than finding Dustin. Kevin didn't bother with the documents, kicked out his stepfather and decided that the apartment was his now. But it wasn't. And soon he found himself on the street. And happy Casper, having found his son again, returned to his apartment. He was happy, thanked fate, which so changed his life. If not for Penelope, I would not be alive. I was freezing in the street when she picked me up. We'd never have seen each other again. Compared to that, everything else is such a small thing. Although now that you're in serious need of treatment, an apartment is no small thing. If you'd come back like this, where would we live? Casper said. What do you mean, where would we live? Dad? You have an apartment, don't you? I don't understand why you gave it to Kevin so easily, Dustin asked. But I wasn't myself, to be honest. I had a lot on my mind. You were gone, my wife's dead, and Kevin's doing whatever he wants. I just couldn't take it anymore, you know? And I didn't feel like I needed it anymore. I didn't even want to live. I thought I'd just die in the country, that's all. I thought you were doing well. Now you see they're offering me a checkup. And I wanted to go to the hospital. Do you think it's worth it? Is it worth it? You're asking the doctor. Of course it's worth it. If I was younger, I could do it. But I can still do something now. I still have my brains and I still know some people. Though they probably think I died a long time ago. But they showed up and I'm going to ask for their help. I have to get treatment. What about the exam? Did it reveal all the underlying problems? Dustin asked. The doctor said that a cure was possible, but it would require surgery, which cost money. The injections alone will not do the job, Casper replied. So we'll sell the apartment, said Casper. After all, he was willing to do anything for the treatment of his son. Well, yes, of course, sell. And where will we live? Whether I will be healthy or not, it is still unknown. And wandering the streets, well, what's the point? His son disagreed with him. Where will we get the money? The sum is unaffordable, sighed Casper. Penelope took part in this conversation and could not help but say her word. So wait, you with the sale of the apartment. Can't we somehow manage without such drastic measures? I have a lot to be grateful to Casper for, too. Yes, she had hoped for a significant improvement in her financial situation. Felix, having fulfilled her request, decided not to stop and gave her the management of the branch of his company. I can see, Penelope, how well you are doing. I realize that your potential is too great, and use you as a regular employee is unwise. If you successfully take over the branch, it will be beneficial to both of us, he said. And he was certainly not wrong. Penelope, using her management talents, was able to significantly improve the work of the unit. In addition, to solve some of her past problems, namely, she broke the firm once owned by her husband. This turned out to be not so difficult. The young men at the helm believed too much in their omnipotence and lost all caution. As a result, she bought the firm for nothing and became the owner. To her surprise, she met her ex-husband there. He left with nothing after the divorce, had tried to find a job, but nothing came out of it. So he's not suited for any serious business. He went to his ex-wife's former office asking for help with anything. And most importantly, she mockingly gave him a job as a security guard. It's a demanding job, of course, and you're not exactly known for your integrity. But Edward and I will take our chances. Just until the first notice, she said. So the former businessman had to stand at the gate in full view of his former subordinates. The most frustrating part was seeing his former mistress with her current beau all the time. They had already become husband and wife, very respectable and important gentlemen, but their prosperity was short-lived. The firm had to be sold for pennies. They had neither the wit nor ability to resist the onslaught of Penelope. Oscar, on the other hand, continued to work as a security guard, and you can imagine how he was amazed to see his ex-wife as the new owner of the company which once belonged to him. So we only had time to rejoice at Scarlett and Edward's collapse, but not only did it startle him, it even raised some hopes in him. After all, they hadn't been married that long, they loved each other, they had children in common. So maybe, it turned out not. Penelope quickly dotted all the I's and said that if he wanted to continue working at least as a security guard, he should behave accordingly. Oscar, you and I have been divorced for a long time. If you're not being asked for alimony, you should at least be grateful for that, and leave the innuendo out of it, she replied firmly to his attempts at reproachment. But I'm still the father of our children, he reminded her. I want to live with them and raise them. You know, I already know your talent for parenting, so you'd better stay away from the children, she said. But if you even go out with them, that's your right, of course. But nothing can happen between us. I'm a hostess, you're an employee. That's all the relationship we have left. Oscar was very angry at that answer. But what could he do? Only dream that the once lost happiness could return to him. However, his dreams could not come true. Soon he learned that the new boss might be getting married. It turned out that the rumors were not in vain. Penelope was not going to stop helping Casper and his son either. She continued to communicate with them, and the children did not forget the kind grandfather, although they already had a professional governess. Not a day went by without socializing with Casper and now his son, Penelope too. She talked a lot with the elderly doctor as well, but even more with Dustin. He talked a lot and interestingly about his life in the wilderness, about what he once dreamed of becoming, and the reasons that kept him from returning to a normal life. I realized it was cruel to my father, but wouldn't it be more cruel if I returned as a helpless invalid? But I was very much afraid of that, and it seems not in vain. Penelope, without your help we could never have done it, he said. But I'm sure I couldn't have done it without yours either, she replied. And soon Dustin was admitted to the hospital. He underwent surgery, and it was quite successful. The doctors promised that with diligent exercise he would be able to walk as well as Watson. Yes, there was rehabilitation to be done. He was happy, but his greatest happiness was that he and Penelope had developed a good relationship. She often visited him in the clinic, sometimes with the children, sometimes alone. And during this time they had become really close and dear people. Therefore, no one was particularly surprised when after discharge they announced their desire to get married. Doesn't the fact that I have 3 children stop you? Penelope asked. Are you kidding? How could it stop me? Dustin was surprised. I love them as if they were my own. After we get married, I'll be a real daddy to them. Or do you think I'm not the right one? Penelope responded with a happy kiss.
Andrew opened a cold can of beer, lounged on the bench, and took a sip. Life is good. He only had to go to work tomorrow. He worked as a picker in a huge hypermarket 2 days later, 12 hours a shift. The work was not easy, but he managed it and even regularly received bonuses for exceeding the plan. He completed bags for couriers of the delivery department and separately for the magician Zoe. What was distinctive about Andrew was his weakness for the female sex. He does not become attached to anyone for a long time. He changed women like gloves. Less than 6 months had passed since he had taken over the entire female staff of the hypermarket, and there were rumors that he had even encroached on the Holy of Holies, the accounting department, for which he was beaten by the men. They said that even beating him was disgusting. That's how he would have skated from one woman to another, if not for Zoe. She worked as a cashier in the department. Her eyes were like two deep lakes. Her voice was like the trumpet of Jericho. And she always smiled when Andrew passed her cash register. He noticed how she caught his eye, and this gave him courage. Andrew decided that Zoe was the one he wanted to keep close. One day, when Andrew was standing in line at Zoe's to buy groceries for dinner, he decided to talk to her. "Hello, beauty," he said, smiling. Zoe turned very slowly and sedately and looked at him like a boa constrictor at a rabbit. "Hello, if you're not joking," she answered quietly. Zoe, with her powerful personality and indomitable energy, was a true Amazon. Everyone in the area knew her and was afraid of her. Men and women walked around her. Even the dogs on the street crawled away when she passed by. Andrew first met Zoe on that significant day when she was dispersing a group of hooligans who were trying to rob an old woman from the magician Zoe. She ran up to them like a thunderstorm and began waving her arms like a big windmill. The hooligans scattered like cockroaches, and Zoe helped the old lady get up and took her to the store. "Thank you, daughter. You are a real heroine," said the old lady, hugging Zoe. Zoe smiled and turned away. "You're welcome," she muttered. "I just don't like it when the weak are offended." Andrew was amazed. He saw how Zoe dealt with bullies, how she decisively entered into conflicts with the enemy. She was not just a beautiful woman with deep eyes. She was strong as thunder, and her presence filled everything around her. He decided to meet her. "Hello," Andrew said, approaching Zoe. "You are a real fighter. How do you do it?" Zoe smiled. "I'm just not afraid of anyone since childhood," she answered. "And I don't allow others to be afraid of me." Since then, they became friends. Andrew learned that Zoe is not only a threat to bullies, but also a caring daughter who takes care of her old mother. They spent evenings together, walked around the city, discussed their plans and dreams. "Aren't you afraid of me?" Zoe asked once. "No, I respect your strength and determination," Andrew replied. And so their story began. Andrew and Zoe, wind and thunder, merged into one big sky. They were inseparable, like lightning and thunder. Their friends and acquaintances looked at them with respect and a little fear, because Zoe was not just a woman. She was a woman who was feared by everyone who ever encountered her. That evening, when the city was shrouded in fog and the streets were empty, Zoe and Andrew were walking in the park, and they had long been more than friends, but less than lovers. Andrew always felt that Zoe was not just a woman, but a force of nature that he would like to always have by his side. "Andrew, have you ever thought about the future?" Zoe began, stopping at an old oak tree. Andrew looked at her, and his gaze was full of questions. "Of course I thought. And you know, there is always you in my future," he answered Zoe, smiling. Her eyes shone like two stars in the night sky. "I want you to be with me not only in the future, but also now," she said, taking his hands. "Andrew, I want you to become my husband." Andrew was amazed. He never thought this could happen. Zoe had always been a mystery to him, rebellious, free. But now she stood in front of him, offering him her hand and heart. "Are you serious?" he asked, not believing his ears. "Absolutely," Zoe answered, squeezing his hands tighter. "I don't want to be the woman everyone is afraid of. I want to be your wife, your support, your peace of mind." Andrew looked at her and realized that this moment was inevitable. Whether he wants it or not, he will become her husband, and then whatever happens. He realized that Zoe was not the worst thing that had happened to him in his life. "Zoe, I will be the happiest man in the world if you become my wife," he said. They walked through the park, ate ice cream, and then, like two school children, they went to the cinema and took tickets to the last row. Andrew tried to kiss Zoe when the lights went out, but he didn't dare. She was too monumental. The next day, while he was working, he went to get some groceries for lunch. And of course, he stood in line at the cash register where Zoe was working. She worked silently and decisively, like a large and precise machine gun. He even began to worry when his turn approached. "Hello. How did you sleep?" Andrew didn't know what to start talking about, although he usually had a good tongue. He knew how to handle women's ears. "Hello, if you're not joking," Zoe answered without a smile and began to punch through the goods. "I slept great, but the mosquitoes bothered me. It's okay. I'll buy plates. They fly away quickly." "Shall we meet at the weekend?" Andrew asked timidly. "Certainly. How can we live without it?" Zoe answered just as colorlessly. Next, don't hold up the line, we'll talk later. Andrew was at a loss as to how to behave. On the one hand, she herself invited him to marry her, and on the other hand, she acted as if she didn't know him at all. Zoe and Andrew took one day off together and decided to spend the weekend at a recreation center by the lake. Andrew took his old SUV and Zoe packed a tent, sleeping bags and food. They set off, giggling and weaving their car along the road like two teenagers who stole their dad's car and just ran away from school. At the recreation center, they pitched a tent near the shore of the lake. Moreover, the tent pegs were installed by Zoe. She tied the tent to them. Andrew put down the sleeping bags. In the evening, the two of them sat by the fire, hugged, and looking at the stars. Andrew told Zoe about his adventures, and Zoe listened to him, smiling. At night, they could not sleep for a long time because mosquitoes were pestering them. Andrew wanted to pester Zoe, but she fell asleep with lightning speed and started snoring so that he had no chance. The next morning, they decided to go for a ride on the lake on an inflatable boat. Andrew, this boat was inherited from my father. He often fished on it. Zoe was delighted with the idea, and the two of them got into the boat and set sail. Andrew realized that he needed inflatable vests and borrowed them from a neighbor. So they were both wearing orange life jackets. The lake was calm, there was no wind, and they swam, enjoying the silence and beauty of nature. Suddenly, Zoe felt that the boat began to sink. The water filled it, albeit quite slowly. Zoe panicked. Andrew immediately grabbed the oar and began to row quickly, steering the boat towards the shore. Zoe held on to the edges of the boat. Her eyes were full of horror. "Zoe, hold on, we'll get to the shore," Andrew shouted. Zoe was shaking, but she believed Andrew. He was her savior. Her, a woman who was not afraid of anything. When they finally reached the shore and climbed out of the boat, wet, Zoe hugged Andrew. "So scared," she said, as if she were a little girl and he was her dad or older brother. Andrew smiled and kissed her forehead, as if she really were his daughter. "Zoe, I will always be there. We are always together. Like wind and thunder, like lightning and rain." "A good fire wouldn't hurt us," said Zoe. She climbed into the tent and changed into a swimsuit and threw a towel over herself. Andrew was making a fire at this time so that he could warm up. Soon the flame was large enough, and Zoe hung a pot of water on the fire. She deftly peeled the potatoes and opened a can of stew. Soon they were enjoying a hot meal, and the dangerous incident faded into memory. The adventures at the recreation center continued. They walked through the forest, picked berries, and enjoyed nature. But one day, when they were walking along a narrow path, a brown bear came out from behind the trees. He was huge, fluffy, and hungry. Zoe stopped. Her eyes widened in horror. Andrew also noticed the bear and froze in place. The bear slowly approached, his eyes sparkling like coals in a fire. "Andrew, don't move. The bear is not aggressive if we don't touch it," Zoe whispered. Andrew nodded, but his heart was beating faster. The bear was too close. Zoe picked up the branch and began to slowly wave it in front of the bear. "Go away, bear, this is not your territory," she shouted. The bear hesitated. His eyes became smaller. She continued to swing the branch like a sword. "You shall not pass. This is our forest," she screamed. The bear retreated, its fur rose, but it did not attack. Zoe continued to squeal and threaten him with the branch until he disappeared into the forest. Andrew looked at Zoe with admiration. She was not just a woman, she was a real mistress of the forest. Her strength and determination were amazing. "You saved us from the bear," he said, hugging her. Zoe smiled and her eyes sparkled. She approached Andrew, kissed him, and dragged him into the tent. She was a passionate, loving woman and almost strangled her future husband. Andrew, barely able to stand, crawled out of the tent and walked towards the lake. There he washed himself, then began to wash himself and screamed loudly at the top of his lungs. Out of surprise, the birds flew off their nests and circled over the forest. "Andrew, let's get ready to go home. What if this bear decides to come back here at night when we are sleeping?" "What do you mean? Are you skin and bones? Here I am, food for him for several days," Andrew said, getting out of the tent. "I wanted to offer this to you myself." "Then let's get ready." And together they dismantled the tent and rolled it up, put all their things in the trunk, and finally decided to take a walk in the forest, which was full of berries. Zoe took the jar and was going to fill it with aromatic berries. Andrew was already tired of walking. But Zoe did not let up. She moved from bush to bush and resembled a bear herself. Andrew admired. He came up behind her and stroked her back. "I'm finishing now." Andrew looked at her with tenderness and suddenly froze in horror. A black viper was crawling not far from her leg, and he saw a lot of them as a child in the village with his grandmother, when he ran into the forest with a neighbor's boy to pick blueberries. Zoe didn't move. Andrew picked up the earth stick and quickly threw the snake away from Zoe. There was just a viper here. Only this was not enough. Then a bear. Then a viper. We've gone, Zoe laughed so hard that her whole body shook. "That's it. Enough of this nature." "I suddenly wanted to go to the city," Andrew announced, and he got behind the wheel. "Come on, jump in." He shouldn't have said that, because when Zoe jumped, the car sank sharply and almost began to scrape the bottom on the ground. The SUV's engine roared, and in 2 leaps the car found itself on a country road that led from the forest to the mountains. Zoe got sick on the road and fell asleep, lounging in the back seat. And Andrew was wondering whether he should be happy or sad that he would have a wife like Zoe Ida. He imagined that they would have children, 2 girls like Zoe and 2 boys like him. He dreamed so much about the future sweet family idol that he almost missed the turn he needed. But he came to his senses in time. Zoe and Andrew did not have a wedding, she insisted. There was only an ordinary, non-celebratory painting, to which Zoe and Ida came in a champagne-colored dress, and it suited her very well. She poked a similar-colored rosebud into her head and turned out to be the prettiest bride that day. After painting, the 2 of them went to a country estate, which had a sauna and a swimming pool, as well as its own mini zoo. Well, and accordingly, a restaurant. Zoe's friend Luda worked in this restaurant. She set the table to the highest standard. There was black and red caviar, trout, stuffed breaded squid, and octopus tentacles. And in the center there was a dish with stuffed crab shells. Zoe agreed on this seafood menu in advance with Andrew. "You see, I really want to try this seafood. Let's order it for the wedding." "Of course, come on," Andrew agreed. Because arguing with Zoe meant condemning yourself to a slow, painful death. When they entered the restaurant, there were no visitors, only their table was set, on which candles were burning, and there was a composition of white and cream flowers. "Come in. Now we'll serve the dishes," said Luda. "Congratulations on your legal marriage. Finally, you have found your betrothed. Don't pay too much attention to him. You won't get it," Zoe said belligerently. "Come on, I have Vasya. He is my best man in the world." "This is good. Come on, work, you've paid for it," Zoe urged her friend angrily. "Don't be offended, I'll bring everything now." She brought out plates of food and separately cut lemons lengthwise on a saucer so that lemon juice could be sprinkled on the fish. Andrew tried everything and decided that regular potatoes with meat were much better. Zoe was also disappointed in the seafood, but what's done is done, and she decided not to spoil the evening with grumbling and nagging. "Let's go and dance. I hope the bear hasn't gotten here yet." Zoe dabbed her lips with a napkin, stood up from the table, and offered her hand to Andrew. They danced for a long time. Zoe had a good sense of rhythm and an ear for music. She quietly sang along with the singer, and this song did not at all fit with her appearance. It seemed like some thin girl was singing. Andrew was once again amazed at how much he didn't know about Zoe. He led her like a true captain of a ship in a storm, and she obediently followed his movements. After dinner, when the sun had already disappeared behind the horizon, Andrew and Zoe decided to take a walk around the estate. The air was so fresh that it seemed as if they were breathing in life itself. Zoe took Andrew's hand, and they headed towards a small pond surrounded by blooming roses. It was reflected in the water like a magic mirror and created a magical atmosphere. "You know, Andrew, I have always dreamed of a place where you can retire, enjoy nature, and just be yourself." Andrew smiled. They sat down on the bench, and Zoe laid her head on Andrew's shoulder. In the distance, the night sounds of crickets and the rustling of leaves could be heard. At that moment, they were happy, like 2 heroes from a romantic story. "Andrew, do you believe in fate?" "To fate." Andrew thought about it. "Maybe. But I have more faith in our own decision. We create our own destiny." "You are right. And at this moment I understand that my destiny is you." Andrew lifted her face and kissed her. Their lips met in a tender kiss, as if uniting two halves of one soul. Andrew and Zoe decided to take a walk around the estate, and suddenly Zoe noticed something strange. She walked up to an old tree that looked like it had been there for centuries. Andrew followed her. Curiosity sparkled in his eyes. "Look, Andrew. This is some kind of secret passage. Look, there's a small door here." Andrew looked closer, and indeed saw a small door hidden among the roots of a tree. It was covered in moss and looked as if no one had opened it for a long time. "Let's check," Andrew suggested, and the two of them opened the door. Behind her was a narrow staircase leading down. "Where does it lead, I wonder?" Zoe asked. "Let's find out," Andrew answered. He turned on the flashlight on his phone and they began to descend. The stairs were steep and dark, but they moved forward, despite the unknown. A few minutes later, they found themselves in an underground room. Light penetrated through narrow cracks in the ceiling, illuminating the ancient stone walls. In the center of the room, there was a table on which lay a dusty book. "What is this?" Zoe asked, picking up the book, from which clouds of dust rose. "Let's see," said Andrew, and they began to read. The book told about the mysterious history of the estate, about secret passages and treasures hidden in its depths. "I feel somehow uneasy." "Let's go back upstairs and not continue exploring," Zoe said, looking around. Suddenly they heard some knocking from above. Someone closed the door and nailed it with boards. The sound of a hammer was heard. "Wait, we're here." Andrew shouted and rushed up the stairs. The man, who was asked to board up the passage so that no one would poke his nose in there, was terribly frightened when inhuman screams were heard from underground. The acoustics in that room were such that every word spoken in the room was heard loudly on the surface. The carpenter threw the hammer and boards and ran in horror wherever his eyes looked. He did not have time to firmly lock the passage, and Andrew tried to knock down the door with his shoulder, but it did not give in. He went down and let Zoe pass ahead of him. She stood up and kicked the door open with one powerful blow. There was a breath of freshness and coolness coming from the street. "Let's go, let's take the book with us. We honor it." She took Andrew's hand and they walked back to the hotel for dinner. Zoe asked Luda to bring them regular fried potatoes and pork chops. Luda fulfilled the order, adding mushrooms and pickles. "This is what I understand dinner," said Andrew, and ate everything. "I am also more inclined to potatoes. We wanted seafood. We tried it, and it was fine." Zoe lived with her mother in a 3-room apartment. "My father lived for a long time with another family, in which he had a blood sister and brother. Since there was not enough money, Zoe went to work immediately after the 9th grade, and then completed her studies at night school. Zoe's mother worked as a school director, and Zoe was taught discipline from early childhood. She also taught her to cook and sew well, and also took her to a dance class. Zoe, on her own initiative, took up Sambo and achieved success. If she had not fallen in love with the coach when she saw him, the whole mood to train disappeared and her knees trembled. Naturally, Zoe was defeated by weaker opponents, although she was stronger than the entire team combined. It all ended with her being jealous of a girl from the team and pulling her rival's hair hard, for which she was expelled from the team. In parting, she slammed the door so loudly that a huge piece of plaster fell off the ceiling of the gym and fell on the coach's head. With a traumatic brain injury, he was taken to the hospital, from where he never returned to work, and was transferred to head a chess club near his home. Having suffered a little for the sake of order, Zoe decided that all this was nonsense, and she had to earn her living. And my mother had already retired, the amount of which left much to be desired. So she got a job as a cashier at a hypermarket. Training took place on the spot, and here students took exams and were immediately sent to the cash register. At first, Zoe was frightened by the crowd of people who stood at her cash register, and by various problems with the product, which periodically arose mainly due to the fault of the accounting department. The sellers were putting out items that had not yet been shown in the program, and because of this, Zoe had to yell across the room, "Kate, how much does cheese cost? It's not in the program." "I'll take a look now. Come quickly." I have a kilometer-long queue. The day Zoe encountered the director of the hypermarket, she was already on the edge. The line stretched all the way to the door, and every customer was unhappy with the delay. When another product did not go through the system, Zoe could not stand it. "Kate, how much does this chicken cost?" "There is no such product in the system." "Just a second, Zoe. Everything will be now." Kate answered and went to the accounting department. But when Kate returned with the price, Zoe was already standing face to face with the director of the hypermarket, who came out to see what was going on and why they were shouting. "I can't work in such conditions," Zoe blurted out in anger. The director tried to hush up the problem, talked about difficulties, but Zoe is not one to remain silent. "Listen, if you cannot ensure the normal functioning of the Zoe magician, then maybe it's time to give way to someone more competent." The director turned red with anger, but Zoe's words resonated with the customers, who began to applaud. Zoe, feeling supported, continued, "I'm not here to correct your mistakes. I am here to serve people who, after a hard day at work, come to the store to buy food and are forced to stand in line because some chicken in the accounting department is sleeping on the keyboard instead of quickly processing the goods." The director, realizing that the situation was getting out of control, quickly left, promising to resolve all the problems. Zoe, nodding with satisfaction to the customers, continued her work, knowing that today she had done something important not only for herself but for everyone in this hypermarket. Zoe continued her work at the hypermarket, but her life was limited only to the cash register and price tags. After all, Zoe was not just a cashier but a real woman, capable of making changes in the most unexpected situations. One day, when Zoe was again standing at her cash register, she noticed that Director Richard was again trying to evade responsibility. He worked around the problems, and Zoe decided it was time to learn the order and discipline that her mother taught her. "Richard, we are having supply problems again. Products do not match price tags. Buyers are slowly starting to rebel." "Zoe, I'm busy. I have an important meeting." "Will you figure it out yourself?" Richard asked. "Of course, Richard, I always figure it out. But here's what I suggest. Let's switch places. You will stand at the cash register, and I will go solve problems with the goods." Richard, not expecting such an offer, agreed. Zoe took his keys and headed towards the office. There she discovered that the accounting department had again screwed up the prices and the products were incorrectly placed on the shelves. Zoe set to work decisively. A few hours later, she returned to Richard, who was already standing at the cash register, trying to deal with dissatisfied customers. "Richard, I have everything sorted out. Now, do you know what it's like to establish order and discipline?" Richard was amazed. Zoe not only solved the problem with price tags, but also showed him that the director should be aware of all processes in the Zoe store and be more responsible. Since then, Zoe has become not only the best employee for the accounting department, but also for Richard. Sometimes she even joked that she would like to become a director. Maybe this isn't a joke at all. After all, in Zoe's life, everything has become possible. In any case, everyone at the Zoe Magician feared and respected her. When her mother came to work, the sellers always offered a better piece of meat, or the freshest bread, or vegetables and fish without ice. After that incident, Richard, the director of the hypermarket, found himself in a difficult situation. His lack of attention to detail and lack of control over Zoe's processes became apparent. Customers began to complain about poor service, and employees became more demanding. Richard realized that this could not continue. He began to actively participate in the work of the Zoe Magician, monitored supplies, trained staff, and even stood at the cash register himself, to understand what problems cashiers experience. Over time, Richard became a more responsible leader. He found a competent accounting assistant to avoid pricing errors. He also began holding regular meetings with employees to solve ongoing problems and improve the performance of the Zoe Magician. Zoe, in turn, continued to be a cashier, but now her influence extended not only to customers, but also to management. Richard even sometimes joked that Zoe could replace him as director. Of course, it was a joke. After all, Zoe was too busy with her work at the cash register and solving problems to think about such responsibility. Thus, thanks to her, he became a more competent leader, and the store was successful and prosperous. Sometimes even Zoe herself was surprised at how small changes could affect big results. Zoe's mom rose from the table and extended her hand to Andrew. "Very nice, Andrew. Zoe talked a lot about you." Andrew shook her hand and smiled. "I'm pleased too, Anne. Zoe is a wonderful wife. You raised her well." Zoe caught the hint in his words and blushed. Mom smiled. "Well, let's hope that you and Andrew will be happy together." Zoe has always been persistent, and I'm glad she found such a good man. Anne sat back down at the table and poured them tea. "Tell me how you met," she asked. Zoe and Andrew began to tell their story. Anne listened, smiling. It was clear in her eyes that she was happy for her daughter and her choice. And perhaps in this chest, among the memories, their happy moments were kept, which were just beginning. Mom's chest is not just a wooden box, but a real storehouse of memories. Zoe has always been inquisitive. And one day as a child, when she accidentally opened a chest, she discovered many interesting things there. Zoe found in it old letters and postcards that her mother received from her family and friends. Zoe found a letter from her grandfather, who served at the front during World War II. In it, he wrote about his love for his grandmother and how much he looked forward to returning home. She also found an album with old black and white photographs of her mother in her youth, her parents, friends, and relatives. Zoe learned that her grandmother was a talented artist. Grandfather is a passionate traveler. Zoe examined the chest. Further in the chest were antique earrings, bracelets, and rings. Zoe learned that her mother received them as a gift from her mother, who knew the famous jeweler and often drew sketches for him. In the depths lay my mother's diary, which contained entries about her first love, about her children, and how she raised them. Every page was filled with warmth and care. Zoe leafed through the diary and could not hold back her tears. Among the things in the mother's chest were mysterious artifacts, ancient keys, coins, amulets. Zoe looked at them for a long time, trying to unravel their secrets. Mom always said that a chest is not just a storage place for things, but a place where a part of her soul is kept. And perhaps hidden in this chest are the answers to many questions that Zoe has not yet asked. Andrew, listening with interest to Zoe's stories, suddenly stood up and went to the chest. He carefully lifted the lid, and his gaze fell on an ancient compass with exquisite engraving. "Anne, can you tell me what kind of compass this is?" he asked, turning to his mother. Family Anne smiled and answered it was a gift to my father. He was a sailor and always said that this compass helps him find his way home, despite all the storms and storms. Andrew carefully examined the compass, and Zoe continued the story. Grandfather and grandmother met in the library. She was looking for a book about sailing, and grandfather had just returned it to the shelf. It was fate. Yes, it's very romantic. Andrew looked at Zoe with warmth in his eyes and told her, "Now, thanks to this compass, I will always find the way to your heart." Zoe smiled, took his hand, and Anne, watching them, thought about how important it is to preserve family memories and pass them on from generation to generation. She looked at the chest and thought that now new stories would appear in it. Stories of Zoe and Andrew. "Let's drink tea to the love that unites the past, present, and future," she suggested, raising a cup of tea. Everyone raised their cups of tea. The room was filled with the warm light of the sunset, reflected in the ancient decorations. They slept together on a wide sofa, which they folded and unfolded each time. Andrew's things fit neatly on one shelf and on several racks in the closet. The belongings were simple. "Let's sleep. I have to get up early for my shift tomorrow." She clapped Andrew on the shoulder so that he sat down in surprise. She stepped into the shower and came out wearing a pretty pink robe that flattered her curves. Andrew went to the shower after it and shaved properly. He felt tired. The harsh jets of the shower gave him energy. When he came out, Zoe was already asleep, turning to the wall. Andrew lay down and, after tossing and turning for half an hour, also fell asleep. He woke up in the morning from an incredible roar and jumped up in surprise. It was Anne who dropped the metal bowl in the kitchen. She got up at 5 in the morning and, having nothing else to do, began baking pies. Today she was making another pie and accidentally pushed the empty bowl onto the floor. The noise was incredible. Most likely the neighbors also woke up. Zoe alone slept in a deep sleep and didn't even move her ears. At first, Andrew was even touched by the fact that his mother-in-law bakes pies in the morning and always has aromatic coffee and homemade cakes for breakfast. But soon, more and more often, he began to catch himself thinking that there was not enough cuteness here, and that a delicious pie could be ordered, but it was not always possible to get an extra sleep after a shift. "Zoe, let's build our own house. It will be good for Mom, and there will be space for future children. Let's. I can already imagine him. And you're smart." And she patted Andrew on the shoulder with all her heroic scope, so much so that she almost killed her husband. Andrew then rubbed his bruised shoulder for a long time. They started browsing websites where ready-made houses were sold. We started learning about mortgages. But after a week of viewings and calls, they decided that they would take their own plot and build the house themselves. For the project, they turned to the well-known Design Bureau City project. Andrew and Zoe came to the architect and explained what they envisioned for their home and how they saw it. The architect promised to draw them several plans and provide them within a week. But the project is paid. Well, let's say we can pull it off, but we still need to earn money for construction. Yes, Andrew, our salaries and my mother's pension are enough just to purchase materials for the foundation. I recently saw an advertisement that drivers are needed for long-distance flights. I have a category so I can try. Try it, but now you'll be on flights, and I'll start to get bored. But I'm for a common cause. Andrew was indignant. Okay, you haven't passed the interview yet. And there is a chance that they won't take it, Zoe said hopefully. Andrew the day before came to the Hyde Transport Company, where he posted an advertisement for a vacancy and charmed all the girls there. Need I say that the next day he was invited for an interview? Andrew was a little worried, but remembered that they were going to build a house where they would enjoy life together, and this gave him confidence. Hello, I'm Andrew, and I came for an interview for a driver position. He introduced himself as he entered the office. Hello, Andrew. Come in. Sit down, answered the friendly man at the table. I'm Alex, HR manager. Tell us a little about yourself and your work experience. I received the category when I served in the Army. Afterwards, I worked for a private transport company for a long time, but it closed and I quit. Now I work in a hypermarket. The goal is to earn money to build my wife and I's future home. Okay, Andrew, Alex said when Andrew finished. It's good that you are interested in money. We are looking for responsible and reliable drivers. And you make a good impression. Let's try. You can start working on Monday. Will you have time to resign and undergo a medical examination? If yes, then come on Monday with all the documents. Andrew was both happy and puzzled at the same time. He thanked Alex and returned home to tell the good news. Zoe was happy for him, but she was a little sad because she knew that now they would see each other less often. Both understood well that these were temporary difficulties and that in the end they would have a happy future in a new home. Thus began a new stage in their lives. Andrew quit the hypermarket in 3 days. He passed the medical examination in 1 day, so by Monday he had all the necessary documents in hand. On Monday he came to the office. Alex met him there and took him to the head of the transport service. He looked carefully at Andrew, as if calculating whether he would fit in the cab of the truck, and said, "Let's go get Johnson's car. He quit a week ago. The car is idle. We are incurring losses. The car has just been serviced. There shouldn't be any problems. Let's see how you do. Today we will set off on our first flight across the country. We need to transport the cargo to a neighboring city. There they will give you all the necessary documents and tell you where to go." With these words, George gave him the keys to the truck and went to the garage. Andrew followed him. They approached a lonely blue truck. "Here is your horse for the near future. The flight is given a certain period of time. If you complete it on time, you will receive a bonus. If you don't, you'll get a bare salary." When Andrew got behind the wheel of the heavy truck, he could not contain his exclamation of admiration. Everything in this car was thought out to the smallest detail: the controls, the sleeping place. There was even a small refrigerator. He turned on the ignition and the engine started. A minute later he left the garage and drove to the address indicated by George. There he stood under the load and loaded the cargo quite quickly. A pretty girl accountant brought him all the necessary documents. She stared at Andrew while he checked whether all the papers were there. He was used to double-checking documents while working in a hypermarket. So he began to travel around the country. 6 months later, they began to give him flights abroad. The first flight was to France, where he spent the day loaded up. Andrew proved himself to be a responsible and disciplined driver. George has set him up as an example more than once. Zoe worked at the cash register, then took retraining courses and entered the economics department of the university by correspondence, so that she would later be promoted. As always, Zoe treated everything very responsibly and structuredly. Therefore, she had time to attend the construction of a house, pass a test, and combine all this with work at the Zoe store. Zoe was promoted to head of the finished products department. There were more buyers, and the finished products department was ahead of other departments in all respects. Zoe carefully checked the assortment, hired chefs and pastry chefs, and accepted the products. The news of the miracle spread throughout the city. People were traveling for delicious cakes and bread from the other end of the city. Bloggers frequented the store. They filmed stories against the backdrop of the department's windows. These stories quickly gained popularity, and there was always a queue in the department. Shortly after Andrew started working, construction on their home began to move forward. Andrew invested most of his earnings into the construction, and Zoe carefully supervised every stage of construction, paying attention to every detail. They both dreamed of the day when they could move into their new home. One day when Zoe arrived at a construction site, she felt a little strange. She was tired and slightly nauseous, which was unusual for her. Zoe decided to undergo a medical examination, and the doctor confirmed her suspicions. She was pregnant. This was unexpected but good news for Zoe. She was excited and had mixed feelings. But at the same time, she was happy. Zoe waited until her husband returned from the flight and told Andrew the good news. He was beside himself with joy. He hugged Zoe and said, "This is the best thing that has happened to us recently." They were both very happy and looking forward to a new stage in their lives. Construction of the house continued, and every day they saw their dream becoming a reality. Andrew worked hard to provide for his family, and Zoe continued to study and work despite her condition. They both knew that all their efforts would soon pay off when they could move into their new home and start a new chapter in their lives with their future child. It was a time of trials and difficulties, but they were both confident that they could overcome all the obstacles in their path. "Andrew, soon we will be able to move into our house with you." I was at a construction site. The walls are ready, the roof is there, the windows are installed. By the way, I insured our unfinished construction. The girls at the Zoe Magician advised me, otherwise you never know, the building materials will be stolen. You're making progress. That's what I think. Now it's time to do the interior work, electrical, plumbing. How do you look at what I bring from my flights? You ask? Of course, take it. And Andrew brought back good plumbing fixtures and accessories from several flights. All the latest model sockets, switches. According to the latest fashion, all this was installed by hired plumbers and an electrician. Soon all the wiring was done, and all that was left was the finishing. "Zoe, we are getting closer and closer to our dream." Andrew was happy. "We have to keep our eyes open. Otherwise something will go wrong and we will remain like my friends." So they built and built a house, and then suddenly lightning struck, and it burned to the ground. Zoe said seriously, "I don't want that." Andrew looked at her in horror. "Who wants it?" "I have already ordered the lightning rod. I want to enjoy life in the house longer," concluded Zoe. "When will the water be installed?" Translated to another topic by Andrew. "They promised this week," Zoe answered calmly. "I don't believe that we have done so much in such a short period of time. Your job is to bring money, and my job is to wait for you and bring our child to term." Zoe Ida smiled in response. The house was ready to move in. Andrew asked George to provide a truck for the move, and he gave it. "You can drive yourself, which is no more difficult than driving a truck. As usual, you are responsible for the safety of the car." The young people had simple belongings. They wanted to buy the main furniture later, once they had sorted out their debts. All things were already in the house. Andrew invited Anne to go with them, who borrowed a calico cat from a neighbor. "Mom, why do we need a cat?" "That's how it's supposed to be," Anne stated categorically, carefully holding the cat in her arms, which was lying calmly. Zoe, whose rounded belly was already very noticeable, came out of the house and got into the car. "Let's go to our house." Andrew turned on the ignition, and the SUV slowly moved away. Anne was sitting next to her, holding the cat, and Zoe was stroking her belly from behind. She didn't have much room in the front. "Are you sure you know the way?" Anne asked, looking at Andrew. "Yes, Mom. I've been there often," Andrew answered, smiling. They drove past old houses, acquaintances, streets, and soon found themselves on the outskirts of the city. Andrew turned onto the narrow road leading to their new home. The car stopped in front of a beautiful house. "Here we are," said Andrew, turning off the engine. They got out of the car and looked at their new home. Zoe took Anne's hand, and together they went into the house to fetch the cat, which Anne released ahead. The cat calmly entered. "Welcome home," said Andrew, following them. Zoe smiled, looking at her husband. They were home, and it was wonderful. It was quiet and cozy inside the house. Zoe looked around, enjoying the peace and tranquility of her new home. Anne walked slowly into the living room, examining every detail. "What a beautiful house you built," she said, smiling. "I'm sure you will be very happy here." "Mom, I won't leave you alone. You will live with us." Again, the air is clean here. The birds are singing. Andrew, standing at the door, nodded in agreement. He looked at his small family. They, Zoe and Anne, spent the rest of the day unpacking and settling into their new place. In the evening, when everything was ready, they gathered together in the living room, enjoying the smell of their new home. "We're home. This is our new home, Mom. We haven't bought a bed yet, so we can't leave you here. Now Andrew will take you home." "Okay, children. Cat, come here." But the cat did not respond. "Kisa, where are you?" Anne asked excitedly, looking around the room. All three started looking for her, but the cat was nowhere to be found. Maybe she went to look for her old house, Andrew suggested, but his voice sounded unsure. They went outside and called her, but there was no answer. Suddenly, Zoe heard a quiet purring, and the sound was coming from the house. They followed the sound and saw a cat sitting on the hood of an SUV. She must have gotten in there while we were inside. Anne carefully picked up the cat and didn't let it go again. Zoe stood on the porch and waved after them until they disappeared from sight. Left alone, Zoe entered the house and walked through the rooms, enjoying the silence and comfort of the new home. She stopped and looked at the window. It was dark outside the window, and only the stars illuminated the night sky. Zoe smiled and went to the window. She opened it and breathed in the fresh air. She felt a stirring in her stomach and smiled even wider, stroked her stomach and whispered, "This is our home, baby." Zoe closed the window and went to the bathroom. She turned on the water and undressed in the shower. The water was warm and pleasant. Zoe stood under the shower, letting the water wash away the fatigue of the day. She turned off the water and dried herself with a towel. Then I put on my pajamas and went to the bedroom. The bedroom was quiet and cozy. Zoe lay down on the bed and closed her eyes. She felt her fatigue slowly disappear, and she drifted off to sleep. She thought about her new home, about Andrew and her future child. She smiled and fell asleep, and I didn't hear Andrew return home. He did not wake her up and quietly lay down next to her on the sofa, since they had practically no furniture. The room was spacious and airy. The next morning, Zoe woke up to the sun's rays coming through the window. I looked at my watch and saw that it was almost 10 a.m. It was a day off. Zoe got up, went to the kitchen, turned on the kettle and started preparing breakfast. Soon Andrew woke up, went into the kitchen, and smiled. He approached her and hugged her. "Good morning," he said, kissing her on the cheek. Zoe smiled and replied, "Good morning. Let's have breakfast already. I want to eat so much. I have a little glutton inside me." She lightly nudged Andrew with her elbow, but apparently, as usual, she miscalculated the force, and Andrew bent in half. "You will be left without a husband so soon." Poor him. "It hurts, right?" "Sorry." The next day, a large bed was brought to them. Andrew assembled it himself. A couple of hours later, a beautiful white mattress was delivered, and Zoe just clasped her hands. "I was completely tired and forgot about the bed sheets. I'm afraid that what we have will not be enough." "Nothing, not enough, but it's there. I'll bring whatever linen you need the day after tomorrow. I'm going to Germany. Write me the dimensions, I'll look there. In the meantime, we'll sleep on the couch." There is no point in spoiling the beauty. Andrew took a tape measure out of his suitcase and measured the dimensions of the mattress. That's it. The mattress sizes are there. What is the size under the blanket and pillow? And the pillows are square. In Europe, I know that they are rectangular. Then maybe bring some pillows. Agreed. Now let's rest. We don't have a TV yet. Beauty. Andrew lay down on the bed and looked at Zoe. She turned smoothly and, like a brigantine, sailed towards him. They didn't sleep a wink all night and ended up breaking the sofa. Well, now we'll sleep on the floor. Why have floors if you have a beautiful bed? Let's lay down what we have and let's sleep on the bed. Zoe didn't mind. She took out the widest sheet, and it fit on the bed. Andrew brought pillows and blankets, and the two of them lay down on the brand new bed. "We haven't tried it on the bed yet." Andrew smiled slyly. "Be careful. I'm pregnant after all." Zoe pretended to defend herself. The bed turned out to be stronger than the sofa and withstood all the storms and hurricanes of passions of Andrew and Zoe. The next day, Andrew got ready for a flight to Germany. He already knew how to get ready quickly, and his backpack with things and a bag of groceries was already standing in the corridor. Zoe had already gone on maternity leave and therefore did not go anywhere. She was seen off at work with great regret and wished to give birth to a healthy baby. "Well, you will leave, and I will remain alone in the house. I'll invite my mother to stay. You do not mind?" Zoe asked. "Of course I don't mind. I don't feel comfortable myself that you are left alone in the house. But we will still have to get used to it somehow, since we have already decided to live separately." I went. "Don't be bored here without me." Andrew smiled, hugged Zoe, and stroked his stomach. Arriving at the base, the first thing he did was put food in the refrigerator and went to a local cafe to buy drinking water. Water was expensive in Germany, and at least he decided to save on this. Already in Germany, Andrew decided to visit a local bar in the evening to relax after a long journey. At the bar, he took a beer and suddenly noticed a girl who was sitting alone at a table and talking to someone on the phone in English. Andrew decided to come over and get acquainted. "Hello, do you speak English?" he asked, approaching the table. "Yes, I'm from the USA," she smiled, closing the book. "I'm Andrew." "Nice to meet you, I'm Jane." Nevertheless, the inner male defeated the family man, whose position away from the family was very weak. "Will you give me your phone number?" They exchanged phone numbers, then walked for a long time along the streets of a small town in which the car was being loaded. "Jane, I'm leaving home tomorrow. I would like to invite you to my place to watch the sunrise together. The proposal is expected." "Do you call all girls that?" she asked sarcastically. "No, only you. I didn't find a better answer, Andrew." "Then let's do it this way. A popular band will perform here tonight. If you get these tickets and we can go to the concert together, then I will agree. Still, you must defeat at least one dragon on the way to the Princess," Jane suggested. "Accepted," answered Andrew. In the evening, Andrew emerged victorious from his fight with the dragon. He got tickets, went to a concert, and spent the night with an attractive girl. In the morning, the demands of the inner male subsided and Andrew said goodbye to Jane with a calm soul. "Should I give you money for a taxi?" he asked Jane. "Yes, how will I go?" "This week I've been looking at new sneakers, but I can't decide to buy them. I'm waiting for a discount," she replied. "Where do you work?" Andrew asked. "I work as a teacher in an international kindergarten. The salary is low. When will you come again?" "Liked," Andrew said with a grin. "Not really, but there's definitely something about you." "I love persistent people," said Jane, took the money from Andrew and left the room that Andrew had specially rented for one night. He usually slept in his car, so as not to spend money on hotels. The car was his apartment, office, and home. He left the city and began the long journey home through Germany and Poland. Andrew thought about his wife and about the future child whose father he would soon become. He brought his wife gifts and sweets which she had really loved lately, as well as things for the baby in neutral colors so that both a girl and a boy could wear them. Zoe, left alone at home, invited her mother to live with her. They spent time together preparing for the arrival of a new family member. Zoe was grateful to Andrew for allowing her mother to come stay with her. This helped her cope with loneliness and prepare for the birth of her child. When Andrew arrived, Zoe was overjoyed and Anne left. Andrew had no attraction to his pregnant wife, especially since he had only recently dated Jane. "You are so caring," Zoe hugged her husband. "I'm tired, I want to sleep." In the cabin, do you know what the dream is? Everything is noisy, rattling outside, making it difficult to sleep peacefully. Let's do it later, okay? He hugged his wife and went to sleep. Shortly after this flight, Andrew departed for France. Arriving in Paris, he decided to visit the famous cafe to enjoy the atmosphere of the old city. A girl was sitting at a table in the corner of the cafe, immersed in reading a book. Andrew noticed that the book was in English and decided to approach it. The girl had a very unusual appearance, beautiful and somehow sophisticated. I'm Emily. I've been living and working in Paris for 8 years, the girl said. Wow. And it's a long time. How did you get here? Andrew was amazed. Mom married a Frenchman. He knew that she had a daughter. He met me and allowed my mother to live with me in his house, answered Emily. What doesn't happen in life? I haven't heard any stories, said Andrew. So you graduated from a French school? Yes, I had to. Not without difficulty, of course. French was hard for me, but I'm still learning it. This is how their acquaintance began. They spent the evening talking, exchanging stories and impressions. Andrew was amazed by her intelligence and charm, and Emily in turn was glad to meet a fellow countryman. They began dating and soon began an affair. Again, Andrew had to rent a hotel for the night to bring Emily there. She turned out to be very skillful in love affairs, and Andrew received great pleasure from physical intimacy with her. Andrew found in this woman what he had been missing at home: passion and lack of demands. And although he continued his flights, he always found time to see her. This novel became a bright spot for him in his difficult life as a truck driver. So Andrew continued his journey, leaving a piece of his heart in every country, regardless of where he was. He always returned to his beloved women, Jane and Emily, who were for him like lighthouses in an endless ocean. Returning home, Andrew asked George for business trips to France, where Emily lived, and to Germany, where Jane lived, and constantly found a reason to stay with them for a day or two. But at home, at the base, they treated the continuation of business trips normally, and one might even say that they turned a blind eye, since Andrew worked flawlessly, loaded himself, unloaded, and everything was always on time. He crossed the border without problems, did not lose cargo, did not go on a binge, didn't make a fuss. Coming home from work after a flight, Andrew saw that Zoe had already started preparing dinner. He walked up to her, hugged her, and kissed her on the cheek. "How was your day, Zoe?" he asked, taking off his jacket. "Nothing special." "Andrew, just an ordinary day," she answered, smiling. In the evening, when Zoe was already going to bed, Andrew told her about his adventures in Germany and France. He kept quiet about Jane and Emily, not wanting to bother Zoe. Instead, he talked about the beautiful places he visited and the people he met. "And I'm sitting at home. I don't see anything except our city. Nothing. As soon as the child grows up, we will definitely go somewhere with the whole family, and you will definitely see the world." The next day, Andrew set off again. This time his path lay in Italy. Arriving in Rome, he decided to visit the famous Colosseum. He looked with admiration at the monument of ancient architecture and sat with pleasure next to him in the cafe. When I was getting coffee, I met a charming Italian woman near the bar. She was a tour guide and offered him a tour of the Colosseum. She also turned out to be a charming native English speaker. In the evening, Andrew invited Mary to dinner at a local restaurant. They enjoyed delicious Italian cuisine and wine, and then walked around Rome at night. At the end of the evening, Andrew walked Mary home and exchanged phone numbers with her. He compared Mary to Emily from Jane. Returning to the car, Andrew went to bed and thought about life for the first time. He realized that despite all his adventures and new acquaintances, his heart will always belong to Zoe. For a moment he felt ashamed. One part of his nature demanded carnal pleasures and pleasures, while the other wanted a quiet life and family. Andrew was torn between these two parts of himself and decided that after this flight he would no longer travel so far from home. He wanted to be close to his wife and unborn child. Returning home, Andrew was incredibly happy to see Zoe. It somehow warmed inside when he saw her. Soon she was due to give birth, and Andrew experienced another pang of conscience. Although he brought gifts and sweets, souvenirs from the countries he visited, he did not feel well, but Zoe was happy to see him, and was glad that he decided to stay home. Over the next few months, Andrew worked closer to home so he could spend more time with his family. He was happy, and despite all his adventures, he tried to convince himself that the most important thing in his life was his family. George liked that Andrew began to work closer to the base, because he could always be relied upon when other drivers went on a drinking binge and did not show up for work. He was thinking about making Andrew his deputy. Emily and Jane wrote to Andrew in online instant messengers, and in order not to get caught, he called everyone by male names and told his wife that colleagues from Italy and Germany were writing, asking when he would be shipping to them. Andrew tried not to think about them, to live the life of his other half as an exemplary family man. Zoe seemed to have no idea about anything. Life went on as usual until one evening, when Andrew came home from work. Anne came to visit her with a cherry pie, and Zoe suddenly grabbed her stomach. "Oh," she screamed, "I think I'm giving birth." "We need to time the time between contractions," was all she managed to say, breathing as she was taught. Andrew quickly took the phone and dialed the ambulance number. While they waited, Zoe tried to breathe deeply and evenly, as advised in the prenatal classes she attended before giving birth. "Everything will be fine," Zoe Andrew reassured, holding her hand and stroking it. When the ambulance arrived, Andrew helped Zoe up and they all hurried to the hospital. Everything happened so quickly that Andrew barely had time to collect himself. At the hospital, Zoe was immediately taken to the maternity ward, and Andrew was left to wait in the hallway of the emergency room. He sat there for a long time while Zoe gave birth, fingering the beads he bought in Italy for Zoe, and praying that everything would go well. A few hours later, a doctor came to him and said that Zoe had complications and had to have a cesarean section. Andrew felt his legs give way. "How are they?" he asked, barely catching his breath. "Your wife is fine," he replied, "but your son." He had to be admitted to intensive care. He was born weak, suffered from pneumonia, and doctors are now doing everything they can to help him. "Don't worry, everything will be fine with him." Andrew felt fear and helplessness wash over him. He couldn't believe that his little boy, whom he had never met, was already fighting for his life. He sat down on a chair, covered his face with his hands, trying to collect his thoughts. Over the next few days, Andrew barely left the hospital. He went home for a short time, took a shower, ate breakfast, returned to the hospital, where he spent time in the corridor next to the intensive care unit, waited for news about his son's condition, and also visited his wife. Finally, a week later, doctors said that the boy's condition had stabilized. Andrew saw his son for the first time through the glass of the incubator. He was so small and fragile that Andrew's heart sank. But deep down, he was sure that his son was strong and could handle everything. Andrew was allowed to touch the child through the round holes in the cuvette. After he washed his hands with soap and treated with an antiseptic, he tremblingly touched the little body, and he was overcome by a wave of love for this little creature, which connected him with Zoe. "My boy, my son," Andrew whispered, stroking his son's leg. The son was fast asleep, holding his arms close to him, and inside Andrew there was a desire to protect him. Zoe and the baby were transferred to the second stage of nursing to another department on another floor. "Andrew, the doctor said that we will spend at least 3 weeks here," said Zoe. "Well, it's necessary, it's necessary. You call, tell me what to bring, I'll bring it instantly," Andrew said. "It's better here than in the postpartum ward," Zoe said, stroking Andrew's hand. Andrew brought water, fruit, baby canned food, and condensed milk to the hospital for Zoe, diapers, wet wipes, and pacifiers for the baby, who was named Victor the Winner. 3 weeks later, Zoe called Andrew. "We are being discharged today. Can you come and pick it up?" "Certainly." "What question?" "I expected that you would be discharged around these days and asked you not to put me on long-haul flights." An hour later, Andrew arrived to pick up Zoe and his son. Anne arrived with Andrew. She cried, looking at tiny Victor. "Stop it. All the bad things are over." "Yes, I'm crying with happiness because I see my grandson." On the day when Andrew held his son in his arms for the first time, he felt that the whole world around him had disappeared somewhere, and only he and his son remained. And all his adventures and travels are nothing compared to this moment. He realized that the most important adventure of his life was just beginning. And it's an adventure to be a father. I felt like a captain on a ship whose crew had mutinied. Put aside your tears. Still good. Come on. He put the bags on the floor and hugged both women. Let me put the child in the car seat I bought. And let's go already. Because I'm nervous, I want to eat. I'm hungry. Zoe took Victor out of the envelope and the two of them placed him in the car seat. Andrew carefully buckled his son in and made sure that the seat was properly secured. "We can go," he said, sitting in the driver's seat and looking in the rearview mirror. "Please drive around the potholes more carefully. Don't brake suddenly," Zoe asked. "Everything will be fine. I'll drive so that the glass of water won't spill," Andrew assured. Indeed, the car drove so smoothly that everyone began to feel like they were sailing on a ship. When we arrived home, the women were dozing, but they woke up and went out. Andrew unfastened the baby and handed him over, and he took the bags out of the trunk, took them, and followed his family into the house. Little Victor was a sickly and very loud baby. He screamed almost continuously, day and night, so that Andrew could not sleep properly. Zoe and Andrew took turns getting up at night to see the child, but in the morning Andrew couldn't really wake up. He catastrophically stopped getting enough sleep. It got to the point that he once almost knocked down a lamppost while stopping by to unload. After this incident, George called him to talk. "Andrew, I understand everything, a small child, all that. But that's also not possible. You need to get enough sleep. Hire a nanny. You make good money," said George. "Sorry, this won't happen again. I wanted to ask you to send me on long-haul flights again," said Andrew. "That's a different conversation." "Is there anyone to help your wife?" George asked. "Yes, Mom will come to her for a while," answered Andrew. "Then this week we will have loading to France." "You already went there," said George. "Great. I'll go get ready." Andrew's mood has noticeably improved. His other part of the active male hunter was bored and yearning for new adventures. "Hello, wife," said George. Andrew received his travel allowances from the accounting department and went to work. When he returned, he parked his truck on the territory of the base and affectionately stroked it on the cold metal of the cabin. "Well, old lady, will we be on our long journey again soon?" "Are you ready?" he asked. Scania, of course, remained silent, but Andrew, always carefully prepared for long flights, checked all the systems of his Swallow and knew that he could trust it. Arriving home late in the evening, Andrew immediately went to the room where his son was sleeping. Zoe sat and rocked his crib. Just fell asleep. "I called my mother. She will come to me tomorrow," she said. "Go get some sleep, and I'll sit with him," Andrew answered. Zoe happily lay down and slept for several hours. Victor was snoring quietly in his crib. Andrew looked with emotion at his son, at his body and tiny arms and legs. He could not believe that he was a father. He made sure that everything was in order, lay down, without undressing, on his side, next to his wife, and instantly fell asleep. Early in the morning, Andrew got into the cab and drove out onto the highway. He was very glad to be back on the road, where new adventures awaited him. His path lay in France, in Paris, where a meeting with Emily awaited him. Andrew liked the French roads and the scenery on both sides. In a Parisian suburb, quite large rabbits grazed on the hills. They calmly and melancholy chewed the grass, and were not at all afraid of passing cars. Upon arrival in Paris, Andrew unloaded the car and immediately headed to the cafe, where he and Emily agreed to meet. He entered and his gaze fell on Emily, who was sitting at a table by the window. She was as beautiful as the day he first saw her. "Hello, incomparable Emily. I see your eyes still sparkle like two diamonds," Andrew exclaimed, approaching the table at which the girl was sitting. She turned around and smiled when she saw him. "Andrew, wow. Long time no see." Hi. "Don't tell me these diamonds are 2 carats, she said, standing up to hug him. They hugged. And Andrew felt his heart beat faster. He was happy to meet Emily again. They spent the evening and night indulging in lovemaking and reminiscing about old times and sharing news. It was a joyful meeting. The next morning, Andrew woke up in a hotel room next to Emily. He looked at her and felt the joy of owning a beautiful woman. He was proud of his love victories, and Emily was one of them. "Good morning, honey," he said, kissing her. "Good morning, Andrew," Emily answered, smiling. They spent the morning together, had breakfast in a cafe, and walked through the streets of Paris. Andrew was happy to date her because the relationship was like an adventure, which he loved very much. In the evening, Andrew returned to his cabin and prepared for the long journey back home. He was tired but happy. He knew that a long and difficult road awaited him, but he was ready for it. His path lay across Europe, and he was looking forward to meeting new people and new adventures. After driving through France, he stopped for the night near the German border, planning to meet Jane tomorrow. She has already written him a message saying that she is waiting for him and is counting the hours until his arrival. Waking up early in the morning, Andrew at first did not understand where he was. That was how deep his sleep was. He was awakened by a message from Jane. "Good morning, are you awake yet? I hope you had a good rest because you will need a lot of energy in the evening at the cafe in the parking lot." Andrew took a shower and quickly had breakfast, after which he left. An hour later, he was already in the city where Jane lived. He parked the car and went to the central square, where they agreed to meet. The decoration of the square was the old town hall with a clock. Andrew loved to walk there and look at the residents of this city. Jane appeared unexpectedly, also oriental, smelling of freshness. Andrew inhaled her scent and, without much conversation, hugged her and kissed her. She was different from Emily, but she was also very attractive. Andrew didn't have much time to meet Jane, so they didn't waste any time and headed straight to the hotel. They ordered food and drinks to the room. Jane liked Andrew, his way of communicating with women, his intensity and passion. She secretly dreamed of persuading him to marry her, although deep down she knew that she had very little chance of this. In such rare meetings, she agreed to the role of temporary refuge, because Andrew made her feel that she was desired and loved. Andrew looked after her beautifully, bringing small, nice gifts, silk scarves, pendants, bracelets. When they left the room and said goodbye, Andrew went home with a sense of accomplishment. All the way he was proud of himself, but felt guilty before Zoe. He justified his adventures with his masculine essence. Well, this is the kind of male I am, and this is how I was, and this is probably how I will die. During the journey, the feeling of guilt went away, and everything that happened seemed to have never happened. Maybe it was, but not with him. It was not him, but another part of him. And now Andrew is driving both an exemplary family man and an excellent employee. Andrew was so confused about his women that he sometimes called them by other names in his sleep. The one who heard someone else's name was jealous and offended. Andrew consoled her as best he could, trying to appease her with affection and increased attention. And I thought to myself, so someday I'll call Zoe by someone else's name. And this will be the beginning of the end. I will lose both my wife and child. At work, meanwhile, the number of orders in Europe increased. There were complex flights when cargo from one city had to be transported to another, where the next cargo had to be picked up and transported further, and so on. The flights were tedious, sometimes taking months or longer. Many drivers refused them because they were very tired, but Andrew agreed, knowing that at home he would always be welcomed with open arms, no matter how much he travels through foreign lands and roads. Moreover, this is a great opportunity to make money. Meanwhile, while Andrew was sleeping, Zoe accidentally discovered his correspondence with Emily. She took Andrew's phone to check the weather forecast because her phone was dead. For some reason, my husband's phone was not blocked. And when Zoe was looking at the weather for the week, suddenly a message came from Andrew's contact. "I miss you so much, I can't forget our last meeting." My tiger, she stared at the smartphone screen in amazement, and an unpleasant feeling rose inside her. Zoe looked at all the correspondence and was horrified by what she saw. Next came a message from contact Leonid. He also wrote, "Beloved, when I fall asleep, I think about you and everything in the same spirit." She imagined scenes of revenge, one more terrible than the other. But she didn't want to do any of this. Then, after thinking carefully, she came up with a sophisticated revenge plan for his husband, which was supposed to shake him up thoroughly. Andrew was fast asleep. After a long journey with the kitchen, the smell of cinnamon and cherries was heard. This mother was baking her signature cherry pie again. Zoe adored him. "Zoe, come in and have some tea." Victor fell asleep. Anne called her into the kitchen. "You don't have a face. What happened?" "Yes, Mom, it happened. My husband, it turns out, is cheating on me. And you know what's worst is that he has several mistresses. 2, that's for sure. Or maybe more. This happens in life. Daughter, the main thing is, don't be upset. Men can be very temperamental, and one woman is not enough for them. Are you protecting him? No, you just can't fix nature." Anne remembered her husband, who had mistresses before her, during her time and after. "Have you already figured out how to take revenge?" Anne looked at her daughter carefully. "Yes, Mom. And you will help me with this," said Zoe. Victor woke up and loudly demanded attention. Zoe went to him and fed him. The baby calmed down and fell asleep again. "Mom, just don't let Andrew slip." "Fine." When Andrew woke up and went into the kitchen, he found 2 women there drinking tea and cake. They both looked at him strangely and smiled mysteriously. "Why are you both so strange?" Andrew asked in surprise. "We just discussed one series in which a man went on business trips and had a mistress in different cities. So he drove between the house and them until one fine moment he was caught by the husband of one of his mistresses. He simply put her out on the street, wearing what her mother gave birth to. That's a male, isn't it? You're not like that with us. Are you a good husband and father? Anne said. Yes, not like that. Andrew answered, trying not to look at Zoe. Pour some tea. I really want to try your cherry pie. They poured him tea and gave him a large piece of pie, which he ate very quickly. This is divine baking. You need to open your own candy store, Anne. There would be no end to buyers. There were 3 days off after the flight, and Andrew decided to devote himself entirely to his family. He walked with Victor, helped with housework, and was the most caring and helpful. Zoe was already starting to doubt it, but she heard an SMS arrive. I still have to put my plan into action. Otherwise it won't end well. 3 days later, Andrew was leaving on a long flight, which was supposed to last, according to rough estimates, at least a month. There were difficult domestic flights and loaded stops. Zoe packed him a whole bag of food, put a pile of clothes, and sat down next to the baby's crib. Andrew gratefully accepted everything that Zoe did for him, and again a worm of conscience began to stir inside him, which he successfully strangled. At the end of the day, I'm a temperamental man, not some kind of impotent. I'm not going to get a divorce to marry one of them. I never dreamed of this. Even in a nightmare, he consoled himself. He set off on the voyage, intending to end his relationship with his 3 passions. He couldn't make any decision, or rather, he did not want to accept it. It was just easier for him. As soon as he crossed the border, he forgot either about Zoe or his mistress. He traveled through Germany, France, and Italy and met with all 3. Made each one happy. Everyone got their share of joy. After these meetings, he suddenly felt exhausted, and he desperately wanted to go home to his loving wife and child. He began to lie to everyone and say that he had to leave tomorrow. There were several trucks in the parking lot, the drivers of which were resting. Under the canopy there was a small table at which sat a group of men talking. Andrew decided that he didn't want to eat alone now, so he took his food and joined the group. The men took him in and put all the food in one pile, from which everyone took and ate. Andrew also put his supplies into the common pot. Can you imagine? I come home, and there I am having fun with my former classmate. Oil painting. I, of course, kicked out both lovers. Gave my wife a hard time, said the big guy in the vest. Divorced? The bald man asked him. Beaten up. So she's still afraid of me, the big man answered. Guys, don't you cheat on your wives on business trips? Asked Andrew. We are a different matter. We are men. That says it all, and we always exercise caution, the big man explained. After lunch, everyone went to their cars. Andrew also climbed into his sleeping bag. He kept thinking about their conversation, and was even afraid to imagine his Zoe in the arms of another man. I forcibly drove away such images from myself and even dozed off for a while. But I woke up to someone knocking on the cabin door. Andrew looked outside. A big man stood near the car and held a kitten in his hands, nailed in the parking lot. I have 2 cats and a dog at home. I have nowhere to take it. Maybe you'll take it. Don't even know. When I was a child, I had a cat. Then he left somewhere and never returned. Probably got hit by a car. Wait, I'll bring you food. I bought it on my way. Yes, you need it now. The big man went to his car and returned carrying 2 bags of food in his hands. Here you go, it's with beef. Mine love these canned goods. Is this a cat or a cat? Andrew tried to look, but the kitten held its tail tightly and scratched desperately. The girl, I called her Marquise, answered the big man. How did you manage to meet her like that? Or have you been standing here for a long time? I've been waiting 3 days for the documents to arrive from the farm. We messed something up. We went to fix it, the big man answered. It's clear. Okay, I'll take your awning. I'm going home anyway. We have our own home. There is a place. Andrew thought about home, and his heart immediately sank. He remembered the conversation between the men at dinner, and he felt cold inside. He was in a gloomy mood the entire way back. Only the Marquise consoled him. She was very calm. The cat sat and slept in the front seat or in a sleeping bag. During stops, he would take her out for cat activities to feed and water her. The Marquise ate with pleasure the food the big man gave her. Arriving home, he entered the gate, went to the front door, but stopped at the threshold. Then, pushing aside the annoying thoughts, he stepped inside. What he saw inside horrified him. Zoe was sitting on their favorite sofa, with a huge man hugging her shoulders. Zoe laid her head on his shoulder and said something affectionately to him and stroked his head. He recognized the man as a neighbor from the house across the street. The blood rushed to my head. Andrew let go of the marquise, who jumped to the floor, and then jumped onto the sofa, on which a happy Zoe was sitting. Zoe turned around to see who had arrived and saw Andrew. "The cat is out of the house, the mice dance," Andrew said angrily. "What is this about?" Zoe asked, as if there was no one in the house except her and Andrew. "What kind of cat is this? My God, how pretty. The name of..." The neighbor took the marquise in his arms and began scratching her behind the ear. The marquise was tormented and basked in his arms. "Now he took my cat, you bastard." Andrew rushed at his neighbor with his fists. The neighbor dodged and laughed, which sent the already enraged Andrew into a complete frenzy. Andrew grabbed a chair and chased his neighbor. The marquise jumped off the sofa and quickly hid under it. Zoe squealed. Victor began to cry in the next room. Suddenly, Zoe stood up and stunned Andrew with one powerful blow. He fell to the floor, not understanding anything and holding his ear. "Zoe, what are you doing?" "For what?" Andrew asked his wife in bewilderment. "This is for your colleagues." "Which colleagues? What are you talking about?" Andrew tried to get up, but Zoe didn't let him and sat down on top. "Sorry, I accidentally read your correspondence. It's just that while I was checking the weather, I received an SMS from my mistress, and then another one." "Zoe, I'll explain." Andrew didn't even try to free himself. "There is no need to explain anything. You've lost my trust. I believed you. As I thought to myself, my husband earns money abroad, and he hangs around with women there. Everything is on time. And how do you have the conscience to look me in the eye, male?" "Yes, Zoe, you are completely and completely right. I am a male, and probably nothing can correct my essence. But you're good too. As soon as I was out the door, you immediately brought a man into the house. How should I understand this?" Zoe did not answer immediately. "Andrew, tell me how you felt when you saw a strange man hugging me." "Like what?" "Jealousy. Anger, of course, what else?" "Then how do you think I should feel when I found out that you have two mistresses who are waiting for you somewhere far away? Or will you say again that this is something else? Do you understand that you hurt me? My heart is broken. I don't know when I'll be able to trust you. By the way, the man is our neighbor, Michael. He and I agreed to act out the scene in front of you. And in my opinion, it was a success. So it's all not true. Michael, sorry." Andrew walked up to Michael and extended his hand. Michael shook hands in response. "Nothing happens. Understand?" Michael rubbed his bruised shoulder. "That is, I'm the only one who changed here. The fact is that I do not perceive this as cheating, but rather as satisfying the need for sex. Do you want me to understand this and forgive?" "Sorry, but I can't do it yet. I pack my things and leave with Victor to visit my mother. For now, live alone and think, let me know how you decide." Zoe began walking around the apartment, collecting things to move. "Maybe it's better if I leave?" "No, I decided so, and it will be my way. Move away." Andrew was at a loss. Michael left quietly. The marquise crawled out from under the sofa and quietly made a puddle near the table. "What should I do with you now? How do you get used to the litter box?" "I don't know a thing." Andrew went for a rag and a bucket and began to wipe up the puddle. In order not to sit at home, Andrew decided to take the marquise to the veterinarian. He examined the cat and gave the name of the medicine to treat the ears. "Fine. Tell me, when can she be sterilized? She appears to be about 3 months old. Bring it back in 6 months, if you don't feel the need first." Andrew arrived home and saw that Zoe had packed her things and the baby and was waiting for him. Andrew, with his head down and looking like a beaten dog, carried his things into the trunk, put Victor in the car seat, and waited for Zoe to get into the car. They drove in silence the entire way. Zoe looked out the window and pretended to admire the scenery. Andrew didn't want to say anything or make excuses. When they arrived at Anne's house, the neighbors were sitting on a bench at the entrance and fell silent in bewilderment when they saw Andrew carrying things into the apartment. And when he carried it and went down to get into the car and drive off, they began to whisper. They just got married. They're already running away, one neighbor said. How do we know? Maybe the house is being renovated, another suggested. Upon arrival at her mother's, Zoe laid out her things and settled into the room. Andrew helped unpack things and set up a crib for Victor. Zoe silently began unpacking things and putting them on the shelves. Zoe, I don't know what to say. Forgive me, please, Andrew began. Sorry. Do you think an apology will fix everything? You understand that you violated my trust and caused pain, right? Zoe answered, not looking at Andrew. I understand that I made a mistake. I didn't mean to offend you, I just didn't think. I do not know how to explain it. Andrew tried to find words, and I thought about you every day. I believed you and waited, and you lied to me, deceived me. Zoe, I don't know what to do. I love you and Victor. I regret my actions. Please give me a chance to improve. Andrew's plea sounded sincere. Chance. Do you think you can go back and forget about what happened? It is not so easy. Andrew, I need time to digest everything in order to understand what to do next, Zoe said with sadness in her voice. Over the next days, Andrew came and tried to help in the house, look after Victor and support his son. He tried to be attentive and caring. However, Zoe remained cold and distant. He understood that he had lost the most precious thing in his life because of his action. Now he had to realize his mistakes and cope with the consequences of his action. Andrew worked hard and thought a lot. He even started going to see a psychologist. He did not believe in psychologists, but several meetings completely changed his mind. He finally figured out what he really wanted for himself. A few months after Zoe left, Andrew decided to write a letter. In this letter, he expressed his deep remorse for his actions, admitted his mistakes, and asked for forgiveness. After sending the letter, Andrew waited anxiously for a response. A few days later, he received a response. In it, she expressed her gratitude for his words and efforts, and also wrote that she was ready to give him a second chance. Zoe came to visit Andrew a few days later. He waited impatiently for what she would tell him. Zoe put the kettle on, put the cake that Anne had baked, and 2 cups on the table. Sit down, we will talk and discuss our future with you. They spent long hours talking about the past, feelings, and what happened. Zoe realized that Andrew had changed internally. She still loved him, did not want to leave, but the pain from her husband's betrayal did not allow her to forget his offense. At the end of the meeting, Zoe said to Andrew, I won't forget about the past, but I'm ready to give us a chance to start over with a clean slate, but remember, it will be a job for both of you. She rose from her seat and poured some food for Marquise. Andrew realized that she gradually began to forgive him, and this made his love for life only stronger. The one who forgives a lot loves more. He remembered the words from the Bible. Together they went for things. Together they brought everything back into the house. Zoe busied herself putting things back into the closets and shelves, then went out with Victor for a walk. The weather was sunny outside. Zoe saw that neighbor Michael was digging beds on his property and decided to greet him. Michael, good afternoon. We're back. How are you doing? Everything is fine. We are returning to normal life, answered Zoe. I wish you success, said Michael and returned to his garden. A taxi pulled up to the house and Anne got out. She came out holding flat cardboard boxes. They contained pies. Andrew went out to the pie and was amazed. So, son-in-law, on your advice, I opened a pastry shop. I make pies. You were right. There is no end to the buyer. I brought you my new items. Try it. That's the news. Congratulations. Well then, come on home, we'll drink tea. He took the boxes from Anne's hands and led her into the house first. Suddenly, a message came to his phone from his mistress. Andrew looked and blocked the contact. After thinking a little, he also blocked the contact of the remaining 2. We have to start everything from scratch. There is no place for old sins, he decided.
Catherine, are you going to work? Why is the department head late to the office? We used to get a little bit of a scolding, but now you're the one in the hospital learning tricks like that. There's order and discipline here. So put your feet in your hands and be there in 5 minutes. Angelina Victoria exclaimed unhappily. "Special Forces." Catherine only opened her mouth to reply as the supervisor had already passed out. Of course, it's easy to say that. Own car has, and not some Zigolnanak, but a foreign car. Why didn't she come earlier? With resentment remarked the girl, hurrying to work. Catherine tried not to think about the fact that today she again awaits a pile of troubles and responsibilities. Within the walls of the trading company, not as a manager, department head, or even deputy director, but just a technical cleaner. Whatever you want to call it. She herself called herself a fairy of cleanliness, and for a sense of inner comfort this definition was enough for her. Why be sad when every profession was important in its own way? This theory Catherine adopted from an elderly janitor who cleaned the area near the office. Imagine, Catherine, that one day there will be no more salesmen, plumbers, or us janitors. That's right, it would be an inconvenience. It's going to be a real inconvenience. Because every job is valuable, no matter how prestigious or not, said Peter Samuelson. Catherine was fine with that explanation, especially if you take into account that in the recent past she worked as a nurse in the surgical department of the local hospital. Everyone in the personnel department marveled at the fact that she had left the medical establishment. Practically, she had not changed anything for herself. Why break the spears? She was looking for a warmer place. Doesn't sound like it, but there was a reason for the situation. And to remember it was unpleasant because the office of the company Hermes was located in the opposite part of the city. She had to get to her place of work by bus. The driver, a man of pre-retirement age, remembered Catherine by sight and always greeted her with a slight nod. He didn't know where she worked, but he was respectful, realizing that her work was not easy. More often than not, Catherine found herself in rush hour while traveling to work. The reason was the remoteness of the office from the apartment she occupied. If Catherine lived a little closer, she would certainly walk. Why depend on a bus that was often late and arrived late? That was the case today. It wasn't the driver's fault. What could he do when the road was jammed to the brim? Plus, the passengers were crammed in like herring in a jar, all because one of the buses broke down, and the buses were loaded on this trip. Who's to blame for that, right? No one. And then there's Angelina Victoria and her admonitions. It's like if she calls, Catherine will show up the second she does. Whatever it was, the mood seemed hopelessly frayed, and it had to happen. Just one phone call, and Catherine didn't feel like doing anything anymore. However, she was not used to. In the Department of Surgery, and more serious conflicts happened. Catherine didn't survive anything. How else? If you pay attention to every offense, then the nerves are not enough. And then, who will help Mom in the village? Unnoticeably, Catherine plunged into a disturbing memory. From the outside, it seemed that she was sleeping with her eyes open. The bus meekly hummed the engine. There was the usual, barely audible murmur in the cabin, when several people, trying to maintain silence, mutter something to themselves that is understandable. Catherine's father died on the river 12 years ago. Anthony Maxwell, the tractor driver, was so famous that people from all over the county came to him for help and advice. Everyone knew that if something broke, they had to go to Anthony. He would fix any mechanism and give it a second life, all because of his golden hands. A true master of his craft, Catherine was still proud of her father, although he had no wealth, lived in modesty. Too bad he left too soon. Fate, there's nothing you can do about it. It was said that his mother, Catherine's grandmother, Gypsy Fortune, telling about her son, "You need to be careful." But Anthony took care of himself. He practically never bathed in the river, and he had never been to the sea. He had only seen it in pictures. In March, he forgot. He fell through the ice, but did not drown. I climbed out, clinging to the slippery ice like rock climbing. Where then was the severe frost that made the tractor driver shiver from cold? It was March in the yard. Winter, not wanting to give up its position, tried to cover the earth with snow and frost for the last time. But the power of the elements was at an end. The snow was melting. The frost was weakening. Everything was melting too, looking at the icicles growing right before our eyes from the roofs. Anthony Maxwell came to the river for a reason. He spotted a wounded she-wolf. From afar it looked like a dog, but when he came closer, he was stunned. The forest predator was lying on the ice. Behind him stretched a trail of blood. The poachers must have done their best. They'd been shooting in all directions since morning. Anthony went to the station that day to take a train to the city to get spare parts and bring pictures of hotels. But it turned out like this. Although the tractor driver fell into the ice hole, he saved the she-wolf. He crawled on his knees on the ice, trying not to pay attention to the cold in his stiffened fingers and toes. The she-wolf lay still, looking hopefully at the approaching man. How she realized that Catherine's father wanted to help, God only knows. But she did not growl, and when the tractor driver approached, doomed to lower her head to the ice. Then Anthony saw what he had not noticed at first. The she-wolf was pregnant. That is, as the hunters in the village used to say. The wolf was pregnant. Anthony was not a veterinarian, but the size of the predator's belly told him that labor was imminent. He himself had recently had a mongrel dog in the yard in the same situation. Kashtanka was almost as big as a she-wolf. Bullets of hunters hit the predator in the back and chest. The strength left her, causing in her eyes gnarled tears. They were not tears, but ice flakes. Catherine was quickly warming up, and her body was shivering from the cold. Anthony took off his jacket and carefully covered the she-wolf with it. His solution proved effective. Using the jacket as a drag, he was able to drag the she-wolf to shore on solid ground. Things were going much better, despite the violent shaking. Anthony got the she-wolf home and collapsed unconscious in the hay. That same evening, Catherine's father had a high fever. His body turned inside out, and he alternately threw hot and cold. Catherine's mother, Jessica, did not leave the spouse for a moment, trying to relieve his condition. But all proved futile. Even a paramedic who arrived from the neighborhood by noon the next day did not help. Bilateral pneumonia is not always cured in a hospital. In the village, with its spring thaw and other factors, the situation only worsened. No, the doctor fought for Anthony's life to the end. He even requested a helicopter to transport the patient to the region. But the old gypsy woman's prophecy had come true exactly as she had predicted. Anthony should have been afraid of water, and he was. But he couldn't cheat fate. The picture is forever etched in his memory. His mother's weeping eyes and his father's pale, almost waxen face. While Jessica was preparing for her husband's funeral, a she-wolf lying in a warm stable gave birth to 3 wolves at the last breath. Even the local veterinarian, Ethan, didn't believe that with such injuries the she-wolf would be able to produce offspring. I should shoot her so she doesn't suffer. I'm sorry, Jess. Euthanasia is the only thing I can suggest, but Catherine's mother changed dramatically in her face, raising her crying eyes to the specialist. No, let her live and fight to the end. My Anthony laid down his life for her, so let her prove that it was not in vain. The vet only shook his head. What could he say? Of course, it's obvious to a hedgehog, but the she-wolf surprised everyone. She gave birth to 3 big babies. She chewed the umbilical cord and climbed in, but she wasn't strong enough for more. Died of heart failure, pulling her life out like a string in a last-ditch effort, despite 4 gunshot wounds in her body. Almost a verdict. You don't live long with that kind of thing. Seeing the gray baby shivering from the cold, Jessica wrapped them in a warm-down jacket and a scarf and thought, what am I going to do next? I've got to get ready for my husband's funeral. And then there's this worry. What if I put them on Kashtanka? Only one of her 4 pups survived, and she has plenty of milk. She's got a swollen udder. Maybe she won't chase them away. The babies are from a different tribe, from the free forest, Jessica thought, and went to the booth where the dog had made her nest, but not in the open air. She has babies to eat. And the box is warm, good. Anthony covered it with felt on both sides, made a roof from the remains of slate, a real home for immigrants. Jessica let Kashtanka sniff the wolves, watching carefully to see if the dog would be aggressive. But her fears were in vain. Maternal instinct at all times works wonders, and the dog could easily feed the cubs of his eternal enemies. And understandably, the cubs are gray or white, growl or yap. What's the difference? When the maternal soul is happy, squeak little mouths, and there is no greater reward for her than to give life to these tiny gray lumps with an exorbitant appetite. Since after the death of her husband, Jessica became seriously ill, Catherine looked after the wolf cubs. Jessica was happy to meet her mistress, trying to lick her from head to toe. She was also proud to show her 3 foster mice, who kept to themselves. They collapsed amusingly, obeying their inner animal instinct. Many advised Jessica to get rid of the wolves, say, take them to the forest or leave them under the nearest bush. Nature itself will figure out what to do next, and to keep predators at home is dangerous, extremely ungrateful. Jessica hesitated for a moment, but Catherine then managed to change the situation for the better. Mommy, let them live a little longer. They're just babies. I named them Warchick, Ethan, and Anthony. Can you imagine? They're just like dogs, only they don't wag their tails. Jessica smiled. Well, let them live a little longer. Their father laid down his life for them. It was the right thing to do, at least for the time being. Since then, the wolf cubs boldly began to live on the Maxwell's farm. Kashtanka, forgetting that the wolves are adopted, only marveled. Why are the pups so gray? The father was light-colored, but they were exactly the same color as the bride, light brown. Time passed without a trace. The lizards were growing fast and strong. However, it was not surprising. All three were males, the pride of their breed. But in the second year, when the wolves grew up, they began to howl at night, so Catherine had to let them go free. Go, my darlings, into the woods. Be smart and don't fall into traps, and also be afraid of people. Not everyone is as kind as my father. When the wolves felt free, they sniffed the air with their noses and rushed toward the nearest thicket. Catherine was a little offended, as if she had caged them. But after running a few meters, the wolves turned around and gave their mistress a long farewell look. The most interesting thing was that the wolves did come. However, they tried to do it in the evening or at night. It is dangerous during the day, and poachers are not slumbering. They are just waiting for a portion of shot to be measured. And for some unknown reason, wolves came to the old cemetery. They don't keep caretakers in such places. It's scary. And who is there to watch over? Warchick grumbled. Ethan always sniffed at the grave of the late Anthony Maxwell and stared at the modest monument, erected with the money Jessica had saved. Whether they knew they were coming to see their savior or not, it was hard to say. They were wild animals, after all. You'd never know what was on their minds. The villagers repeatedly told Catherine that they had seen wolves in the cemetery, but she didn't believe the rumors, and then she went to the city to try her hand in the metropolis. In truth, the girl's departure seemed more like a flight, and her mother had good reason to think so. Greg Morrow, the son of a local farmer, was to blame. When he saw a pretty girl, he immediately sent matchmakers to her mother. But Catherine refused. Too fickle was Greg, and also too often allowed himself to get drunk, not the kind of groom she dreamed of. What can I say? Her late father, if he drank, he did it only on holidays, and then in moderation. And here he was so young and already an alcoholic. Politely refusing Greg, Catherine thought that would be the end of the matter, but it wasn't. Farmer's son began to pursue her at every turn, literally. Goes Catherine to the river, Greg will somehow go there. To the post office he follows. Greg is already waiting at the front door. When annoying courtship did not help, the farmer's son turned to threats. Don't let your happiness slip away. I've got 5 local beauties in my sights. You're working, you're looking, but you're still looking. Except for my farm, no one here will offer you anything good. And if you're more cooperative, I'll put you on a poultry farm. Or a milkmaid. You'll get a percentage of the milk yield. You'll have money. But if you keep resisting, you can forget about work. And not only for yourself, but for your mother as well. Catherine's outrage took her breath away. Are you threatening me, Greg? But understand, I don't love you. You said it yourself, handsome as can be. Well, God help you. What's that got to do with me? Greg grinned wryly and shook his head. He walked away. Catherine realized that from now on she would not live in the village. Greg Morrow was too vindictive. She remembered him from school. If he didn't like his teacher, he would put the button on the chair or wave the chalk behind his back. The principal would call his father, and Farmer Morrow would start throwing money at him. Here's money for repairs. Here's money for new curtains. I had to put up with Greg. What could he do when his father was king and god in the neighborhood? Jessica took the news of her daughter's departure calmly. After all, a man is an adult and makes his own choices. You just be careful, daughter. But in the city, everything is complicated. It's not like ours. I sewed a secret pocket in your coat. to keep your money in. I've been saving a little from every paycheck for the wedding. It's all right. There'll be a holiday on your street, too." After the words of his mother, in the eyes of Catherine glistened tears. After the death of his father, they almost did not talk to each other, and now again became so close as in her distant childhood. That evening, mother and daughter sat up late, talking about everything and remembering the past. And in the morning, Catherine sat in the train and, breathing a farewell breath of fresh air, went to meet a new life in the big city. Megapolis met the guest from the province unkindly and reminded the alarmed swarm. Find a job was not as easy as Catherine imagined. There are no positions available. We need female employees with experience. Where's your employment history, was all she heard as she walked around the place. At one point, she even wanted to go waitressing in a restaurant, when by chance she met Mary Frederica, who worked as head nurse at the First City Hospital. By some elusive instinct, the kind-hearted woman immediately recognized in Catherine a newcomer. "And you must be looking for a job, sweetheart, so I'll help you. You do not worry. I work in surgery, and we just need nurses. You want to come? Or are you looking for something better?" Catherine looked at her new acquaintance gratefully and said quietly, "I'm in." "Really? You don't need a medical degree there, do you?" Mary Frederica smiled. "No, it doesn't. And if you need anything, I'll teach you everything you need to know, just for general knowledge. You know, everything will come in handy in life." So, thanks to the help of a concerned nurse, Catherine became a nurse in the surgical department. There was a lot of work, even a lot. Nursing staff was constantly short, and Catherine had to take care of 2, and sometimes 3 employees. Fortunately, Mary Frederica immediately took the new nurse under her wing and did not allow anyone to hurt or harass her. In parallel, a lonely nurse taught Catherine the wisdom of her hard work. So just in case they teach her to give injections, to put a catheter or an IV, the other nurses only laughed. "Why do I need these skills, Mary Frederica? I'm an orderly. What kind of duties could there possibly be? To keep Paul clean? Yes, the room is cleaned, and you want to make a generalist out of me," but Mary Frederica just shook her head and invariably told the story of her childhood when she couldn't help her friend who had swallowed water in the river. All because she didn't have the skills. Thank God, the girl was saved by a concerned bystander, and she survived. But the case itself is forever in Mary's memory, and for many years predetermined her choice of profession and fate. Therefore, teaching Catherine the skills of first aid, Mary Frederica invariably repeated, "You do not think that I just say so. Remember my other words? There are times in life when you have to act for sure and there is no time to think. God willing you don't have that happen." Catherine listened to the head nurse and everything and didn't even think of resisting. The skill did prove useful, especially when working in a surgical ward. At one point, Mary Frederica had even considered talking to the superintendent and sending Catherine to nursing school. What's wrong with that? Responsible female employees like that are always needed. Everyone knows that. And unfortunately, Mary Frederica's dreams were not destined to come true. And who would have thought that the culprit would be a young surgeon who, until recently, was listed as an intern in the Department of Surgery. About Stanley Ovchinnikov at that time knew only that he graduated from university only thanks to his father, who has a high position in the ministry, and so long ago would have been expelled for failure and systematic absenteeism. That's right. And when to study? When in the head only girls and partying until morning and pockets full of money. A foreign car, expensive, golden youth. Why did he go into medicine? Wondered Mary Frederica. Catherine only sighed modestly, afraid to criticize such a prominent employee. Well, but Stanley always knew how to present himself, dressed with a needle, a straight and open look, expensive perfume, and a pleasant, slightly languid voice. Such qualities can easily open the door to almost any woman's soul, and all that would have been fine. But Stanley's priority was to get his way. Questions of romance, of sensual relations, were of no importance to him. Mary Frederica immediately sensed the threat emanating from this fatal handsome man. Such only for love dramas. A sea of tears are suitable, and in life from him no use. Or maybe he just hasn't found himself. Well, it happens. He grew up in a rich family with everything at hand. Now it's a different world, a different environment, Catherine objected naively. But to lead the head nurse was not everyone could. He didn't find himself, you say? Yes, he has found himself, my dear. He has found himself. And all he cares about is money and his own amusement, Catherine, of course, believed Mary Frederica, but still furtively glanced at Stanley, such a handsome man. What's a farmer's son like Greg Morrow? Oh, dreams. Just dreams. At first, Stanley didn't seem to notice Catherine. Well, why should he be surprised? What was she to a young surgeon starting out? Just an orderly. Fetch, serve, and don't forget to mop the floor. Stanley and Catherine probably wouldn't have gotten close under the right circumstances if it hadn't been for chance. And it all began when a nurse found a bank card belonging to Ovchinnikov on the floor. Like all good girls, Catherine returned the find, which greatly pleased Stanley. Thank you so much. I was just looking for it. I wondered if my father had taken it from me. Catherine lowered her eyes in embarrassment. You're welcome. I didn't do anything special. Carefulness is a specialty in this business. Stanley smiled enigmatically. Then suddenly, out of the blue, he said, Listen, Catherine, what if I offered to take you to the movies as a thank you for your help? Although if you don't want to go to the movies, you can go to a restaurant or a cafe. You don't worry about the cost. I'll take care of everything, any outfit you want. Catherine's cheeks are flushed. While Ovchinnikov himself asks her out on a date. But how can you refuse? In the memory immediately recalled the words of Mary Frederica, warning of the possible consequences. But Catherine immediately discarded them, mentally giving herself an attitude. All right, I'll go once. But what's wrong with the new movie? We'll see it. It doesn't mean anything, of course. It's always easy to fool yourself if you want to, especially when you really want to. In this case, Catherine deliberately chose a movie theater because she was very afraid of all these newfangled restaurants with their abundance of unfamiliar dishes and all sorts of given rules. The first date went as smoothly as it could. Stanley was polite, modest, and cautious. No free hot hugs or kisses. Catherine even felt as if she'd come to meet a fellow nerd. Ah, if only she had known that the cunning spider named Stanley had already begun to weave his web, from which the beautiful, naive butterflies were no longer destined to escape. Mary Frederica tried again to warn Catherine of the danger, but how could she? She was literally enchanted by Stanley, his voice, his look, the scope of his courtship. Catherine began to think herself exceptional, that she could overcome the barrier of internal prejudices and find love. How many gullible girls around the world every year fall for this fishing line? Catherine was no exception, believing in the sincerity of the feelings of Major Stanley. Of course, it was a mistaken delusion, but so pleasant, exciting, that even dizzy. Dates and romantic encounters followed one after another, sucking young people deeper and deeper into the abyss of passion. It's hard to say whether Stanley was in love at a certain stage of the relationship or not. Perhaps some kind of crush was still there, but the heat of feelings clearly pumped up, giving way to practicality and common sense. The news of Catherine's pregnancy affected the lovers with the effect of a cold shower, and it was Stanley who was the first to show his concern. Oh boy, what bad timing. I just got a job at the department, starting to build a career. And now there's such a burden on my shoulders. Catherine looked at him with surprise. Stanley, but I'm the one having the baby. How can my pregnancy and childbirth interfere with you? Especially since we've already talked about it. It's no big deal. We'll get a place to live when we're done. Stanley's face contorted into an irritated grimace. Just like you say. Did you know we did all this romance on Daddy's dime? Rose petals, custom-made bouquets at expensive hotels. I don't know what you're getting at. What's my point? My point is that if my dad finds out you're pregnant and getting married soon, he'll cut off all my accounts and I'll be a pauper. And you with a beggar's wife, who will darn my old socks and feed me macaroni in the evenings. He shrieked. Tears rolled down Catherine's cheeks. What do you suggest? What's the solution? I don't understand. Stanley frowned. The only suggestion I have is to abort while the term is early. I'll give you the money. Don't worry about it. I'll arrange for the best clinic, no waiting list. Catherine looked into his eyes and saw in them the same consumerist attitude to life, about which she so many times told Mary Frederica. Mary Frederica, I will not go for it. You remember that? Do you hear me? Your father can't even count on it. I won't ask for child support. And I'm gonna give the baby my last name. A shadow of anxiety slid across Stanley's face. In fact, he had not even allowed such a development. He had hoped that Catherine would give up immediately after his proposal. But this redneck was much stronger than Stanley thought. All right, just take it easy, think it through, and then you can explain your decision. But I'll decide what to do next. Don't worry about it. I'm not against having a baby. I just wanted to see your reaction. But now you've seen it. So think about it, Stanley. Do you want us with the baby or not? Catherine said goodbye. Stanley gave her a glance, then hissed. Well, we'll see whose will take it. The next day, Catherine began to have problems. First, her advocate Mary Frederica was transferred to another department, and then she was retired. All this happened so quickly that Catherine did not have time to remember. The new head nurse disliked the young nurse at first sight. It's not surprising, because the head of the department gave the order, and he directly Stanley's father, who did not like the story told by his son. You'll bend this nurse into a ram's horn for me. Fill her with work up to her eyeballs, just so she would forget to think about the child and grab a good job. Ovchinnikov shouted into the phone. The head superintendent frantically ran to execute the order. Deep down, he liked Catherine as an employee, quiet, hard-working, reliable. But when the case involves a higher authority, it is no longer to personal ambition. Sam, they say, would survive, to hold on to the chair with both hands. The head of the department, although not God knows what, but still a position, and not bad, by the way. And Catherine continued to work by virtue of her naivety, not realizing what was going on around her. Seeing that the girl did not understand the hint, Ovchinnikov Sr. increased the pressure, from which the nurse literally fell off her feet from fatigue. Stanley only laughed and patiently waited for Catherine to backtrack. They say she realized the mistake. Please help me in my difficult May. But Catherine persisted. So Stanley decided to go the other way and talk to her mother. To do this, under an anonymous pretext, he suggested to Catherine to go to the village with him by car. Probably will propose. Ah, what a romantic, thought Catherine naively. Stanley hatched a completely different plan, more cruel and heartless. Picked up on Saturday Catherine from home, he put on a mask of cordiality and pleasing and drove to the highway. On the road, the young people chatted about all sorts of trifles, trying to pass the time on the road. And if Catherine communicated with her fiancé sincerely, Stanley talked through force, mentally begging that all this is over soon. On either side of the road grew spruces, pines, cedars, practically covering the sky. Suddenly the conversation was going in a very different direction than Stanley had intended. This was the fault of Catherine, whose curiosity had once again played tricks on her. She thought Stanley wanted to talk to her mother about the wedding, but that's not what happened. No, Catherine, the young surgeon grinned. We're only going to your mother for one purpose, so that she can tell you the right thing to do. Catherine's cheeks flushed, her lips trembled treacherously. It was about 50 kilometers to the turnoff to the highway leading to the village when she asked the car to stop. What, right here in the middle of nowhere? Stanley asked. Are you out of your mind? He blustered and pressed the brake pedal. The car jerked sharply and stopped like a stumbling block. Catherine didn't care anymore. Trying not to hear Stanley's insults, she opened the door and stepped out into the driveway. Shut the door at least. Where are you going, you idiot? Are you going to walk to your village or something? Stanley said wryly. Catherine took a couple more steps and, holding her stomach, collapsed on the roadside strewn with last year's leaves. Well, stop the comedy. I know your tricks. You just want to make a scene. I'm pregnant, and you're all going to carry me in your arms. What? And what else? Stanley grumbled unhappily. But Catherine was really sick. Really bad. The pain in her lower abdomen was tearing her up, making her bend over. It was impossible to convince Stanley of that. Getting out of the car, he tried to lift Catherine off the ground, causing her more pain. All right, enough showing off. Let's go, Stanley said. Please, leave me alone, Catherine whispered through tears. Stanley was about to make another joke when a muffled growl sounded nearby. The boy flinched and looked around involuntarily. But there was no one near him but Catherine. The growl was repeated again. and now Stanley realized that it was coming from the nearest bushes. He involuntarily backed toward the car as 3 adult wolves came out of the woods. One of them had a grayish-blue streak down his withers, indicating his advanced age among forest predators. Growling menacingly, the wolves came closer, causing Stanley to scramble toward the car and screech to a halt. All he could think about at that moment was how to get away from such a dangerous place. He didn't care about Catherine. This was the true cost of a relationship, a lie and nothing more. The wolves approached Catherine, who was lying on the roadside, and began to lick her face and hands. She looked up in surprise and couldn't believe her eyes. "I'm going to disappoint you, you brave little rascal." "Is it really you?" Catherine asked. The wolves stepped back a little, listening to such an outlandish human speech. Of course, Catherine could not say for sure whether the wolves she had rescued were wolves or not. Perhaps it was just an ordinary coincidence. But on the other hand, why then had they not attacked her and shown friendliness? Catherine read the answer in the eyes of the wolves, who looked at her with respect, as if she were a member of their pack. Soon the sound of an approaching car engine was heard, and the predators became visibly agitated and slowly paid. More often, a wave of pain in her lower abdomen made Catherine wince again and fall into sticky oblivion. Fortunately, a passing motorist noticed the woman lying on the side of the road and called an ambulance to help the victim as soon as possible. He carried Catherine into the passenger compartment of the vehicle and drove towards the paramedics. Despite the timely assistance and efforts of the doctors, they were unable to save Catherine's pregnancy. Stanley was not directly to blame, and no one would have even had the desire to accuse him of it. Catherine spent about 2 weeks in the hospital, during which time the head of the surgical department dismissed her retroactively. Everything went smoothly. Nothing to take issue with. But Catherine didn't care anymore. In her mind, she cut Stanley out of her life forever. And when he showed up at her discharge with flowers and an envelope with money in his hands, the former nurse refused to accept the bouquet and threw the money in the trash. From now on, she could only count on herself. Since the work in the surgical department could be forgotten, Catherine had to go through a lot before she could find the strength to live on. Bitter tears of anguish and tantrums, the endless questions of why kept her on her toes, slowly sinking into an abyss of longing and despair. It was only through the help and care of Mary Frederica that she was able to distract herself and turn her attention to finding a new job. So, with the light hand of the former nurse, she became a cleaner in the trading firm Hermes. The work was hard, but no more so than in the surgical department, where shortly before her dastardly dismissal, she had been working for 3. "It's okay, I'll manage. I'm strong, I can do everything, I'll get through it all," Catherine insinuated herself, trying to be callous and indifferent to other people's misfortune in a state of anxious reflection. She was brought out by loud shouts from the front of the cabin. "Stop the bus. There's a man in bad shape here. Somebody call an ambulance right away," she heard, and a sense of relief came over her. Catherine opened her eyes and saw the crowd parting. Standing in the aisle next to an elderly man was a female controller with a frightened face and eyes full of fear. Catherine realized that she didn't know what to do next, but she needed to act immediately. She left her seat and made her way to the lifeless body of the passenger. He probably had a heart problem, and Catherine understood that as well as anyone. She wasn't a doctor, of course, nor was she a nurse or a paramedic. She just remembered Mary Frederica's insistent advice to her to practice a particular skill to the point of automaticity. So Catherine knew how to give injections of all kinds, could put IVs, measure blood pressure, and also knew how to conduct indirect cardiac massage, the principle of which she remembered to automatism. Asking the driver to pull over, she unbuttoned the man's shirt and got to work. As she made rhythmic movements, trying to ignite a spark of life in the stranger's body, her confidence in the success of this idea was getting weaker by the second, but it was too late to stop now. "Come on, don't go away," honey, Catherine murmured through her tears. Those who watched from the side, in horror, covered their faces with their hands without stopping to whisper words of prayer. Finally, the man's eyelids fluttered open, and he began to cough hoarsely. But the main thing was that he was breathing again, albeit intermittently, but breathing. For Catherine, it was like a personal victory. So many times she had practiced this skill on a special mannequin, without listening to Mary Frederica's comments. And now was the decisive moment for her. Then it was not in vain. "Where am I? What happened to me?" the man whispered. Catherine could not answer, as she had become wound up in anticipation. Stress caused by the sight of death, which this time missed and bypassed the interior of the bus. 5 minutes later, the ambulance arrived. The medics, who expressed their gratitude to Catherine, who didn't even have a medical degree, immediately took the victim away, and she didn't have time to talk to the rescued man and get his name. Because of all these events, the bus spent an extra 20 minutes on the road, from which a terrible scandal awaited the young employee in the office. The first to attack her was the head of the sales department, Angelina Victoria Jesus Maxwell. "Did you even look at the clock? Or don't you care about anyone? This is what you call getting here faster? You're kidding me." "Angelina Victoria, but it's not my fault," Catherine objected. "A man got sick on the bus." The supervisor waved her hand dismissively. "What bus? Tell me, for goodness sake. If you don't have your own transportation, take a cab and you won't have a problem." Catherine's shoulders shook with restrained sobs. At that moment, the office door swung open and Andrew Clive, the firm's director, appeared on the threshold. He looked around at his subordinates and immediately noticed the crying face of Catherine, who was desperately trying to look normal and wiping her eyes with a handkerchief every now and then. "What's going on here? Why is there such a commotion and Maxwell is all in tears?" the businessman asked. Everyone present fell silent. Their gazes turned to the head of the department. They said, "She made a mess of it. Now you have to clean it up before the boss punishes everyone." Looking at the stunned boss, Andrew repeated his question more gently. Angelina pressed her lips together resentfully, but replied, "It's simple. Maxwell was almost 40 minutes late for work." 20, Catherine corrected. "Who cares if it's half a minute late, you know?" Angelina snapped. Andrew was not interested in watching the squabble between the employee and the department head. The young businessman needed not so much a reason as an explanation. But what is Catherine's explanation? Maybe something respectable happened. You can't accuse a person of being irresponsible for no reason. Angelina glanced irritably at Catherine and hissed angrily. Yes, she was on the bus rescuing someone. Some man fainted, and our Mother Teresa gave him CPR. We know those stories. You don't need to believe other people's nonsense. After the words of the department head, Andrew's face changed dramatically. "What man? Can you elaborate?" Angelina met his gaze, after which she said, "What man, Andrew? It's just an elderly man who collapsed. He had a heart attack, so I gave him an indirect massage." Andrew raised an eyebrow in surprise. "Do you have a medical degree?" "Catherine." The cleaning lady lowered her eyes in embarrassment. "No, I used to be a nurse." "That's what I learned, a nurse. Thanks to her teaching." Andrew looked around at everyone present and met the eyes of the head of the department. "So, Angelina Victoria, we are canceling Catherine's reprimand today, as her tardiness was no accident. The fact is that Catherine saved the father of my late companion Boris Eugene Windrow. Dennis Windrow, co-founder of our concern, was killed in an accident 6 months ago. But you all remember that, of course. You don't know his father Boris Gary Windrow very well. He's the one Catherine saved on the bus today. I was just told about 15 minutes ago myself." The director's words made a truly lasting impression on the staff. A lot of people looked at Catherine with a different set of eyes. It turns out that there are real heroes among them, capable of saving lives. That's how you live, and do not know that side by side with you works a girl who can do real miracles. And on a personal note, I'm going to give you a bonus, Catherine. You deserve it, Andrew said in your voice. And the office was filled with a roar of applause. Only Angelina didn't clap along with everyone else, glaring angrily at the cleaning lady. When the applause finally died down and the staff scattered around the office again, Catherine went to the back room to finally change her clothes and go about her usual duties. She saw nothing special in rescuing an elderly passenger. I didn't give him all that time for nothing. If I had saved a child, I don't know. That would be a different matter, she thought. The shift flew by at the ferry of cleanliness unnoticeably. She washed the floors, wiped the windowsills, watered the flowers, then went outside and tidied up the steps. Had a few words with the janitor, and the day is over. But 10 minutes before the end of her shift, the director called her in. Well, what else? Did he change his mind? Will he start scolding? Catherine thought wistfully. But Andrew kindly offered her a chair and asked the secretary to prepare coffee. Then, after waiting for Catherine to come to his senses and drink about half a cup, went to the main thing. Catherine, will you pardon me for not using your middle name? It's easier for me. You see, I have, what's the right way to put it? A business proposition. On the face of Catherine reflected sincere amazement. An offer? But how can I help you? I'm already on your staff. Andrew got up from his desk and walked around the office, trying to understand the inexplicable inner turmoil. Finally, pulling himself together, he continued. Catherine, I'll be very honest with you. The offer does not even come from me. Boris Gary Windrow, the man you rescued, you see, he wants you to be his nurse. A nurse? I don't have the training and the responsibility of taking on such a... Andrew frowned. I appreciate your opinion, Catherine, but I dare say that Boris Gary Windrow, the father of my late friend, we started together, came up from the bottom. Only Dennis died 6 months ago in a car accident. Maybe you heard about it on the Beltway. Head-on collision. Ridiculous death. Still hurts my heart. Dennis' wife is a widow. Boris Gary Windrow is ill. Often says that he cannot without medical help, you know. Catherine sighed sadly. Yes, I understand, of course. How could I not? But what's that got to do with it? You can hire a qualified caregiver. There are many special recruitment agencies nowadays. Boris Gary said you were the only one he could trust. He's a good judge of character. Let me tell you, 40 years in the teaching profession. Does that mean something? Andrew persisted. Catherine thought. On the one hand, she had always dreamed of trying to try herself in the world of medicine, but on the other hand, remembered well what ended her previous attempt. But to refuse Andrew William for some reason did not want to. There was something in his eyes, something good, kind, and real. No falseness, no playing on two fronts, he said it as it was, straight to the forehead. And how else to earn the trust of the interlocutor? Catherine squeezed her lip painfully and looked into the eyes of the director. And what will happen then? Andrew William? But when a month passes, or how long does it take? What about my job? Andrew appreciated the boldness of the question and answered very honestly. For the period of part-time work, Catherine's workplace at our firm will remain with you. And when you return, you can work as before. Consider it my bonus for you. Boris Gary also intends to pay you a salary, as I remember. Catherine smiled involuntarily. And not because Andrew started talking about money, but because he said everything on the merits, honestly and frankly. Weighing the pros and cons, she agreed. The next morning, Catherine stood at the door of the mansion of the late Dennis Windrow. She was greeted by an unpleasant girl in a lace robe and Lycine and with a touch of understanding on her face, typical of those who are crazy about wine, fires, and songs. What are you, the new nurse? She mumbled, glancing at her guest incredulously. Catherine nodded affirmatively. Why are you so early? It's only 8 o'clock. Normal people are still asleep and dreaming rainbow dreams, she said hurriedly. That old man be damned was sitting there canceling as if they could help him. Doctors say a month left, but if the operation is not done. After letting Catherine through, the girl started complaining. As it turned out later, it was Boris Gary's sister-in-law, Albina. Not the least bit embarrassed by the presence of a person she didn't know, she ranted aloud. Auntie, don't count on a permanent job here. This old man will drive anyone crazy. One thing he likes, then another, then, you see, the candidate does not know the poets of the Silver Age, then did not read modern prose writers, accustomed to his school children and the head of his children. But with me such tricks will not pass. Catherine shrugged uncertainly, realizing that the least she wants to discuss the sick man in whose house she came to work as a nurse. Your silence is sly. Do you want to stay? Well, am I yours? There's been a lot of you in the last 6 months, one or the other. Well, how will he see? Come to my place. I'll buy you a martini or something stronger, cognac or whiskey, which I don't spare. Otherwise, this old man will not be tolerated at any price." Albina went resentfully to her room. Catherine had to act on her own intuition. She found Boris Gary's room only from the third time, after going through several doors. Seeing her on the doorstep, the man visibly perked up and even tried to raise himself up in bed. "I've been waiting for you, felt in my heart that you'd say yes. Believe me, I saw you in my dreams before that incident on the bus," he said. "My grandmother on my mom's side was a fortune teller, so a little of it was passed on to me." Catherine smiled and said her name. Boris Gary was over the moon. "I was on my way to the cemetery to see my son, thinking about painting the fence, weeding the grass. It's been 6 months. It's too early to put a monument. The earth has to settle. But you see, I didn't make it to the cemetery. I got a heart attack. Maybe from the heat. Maybe the excitement gave you a fever, Grandpa." Catherine looked at the patient reproachfully. "You need to take care. Boris Gary, you're no longer a boy to risk your health, and I can go to the cemetery myself, if you like. It's no trouble to me." "Catherine, don't make this your problem. Don't put other people's worries on your young shoulders. Denise was a good boy. Don't think. He and Andrew were in the same class. They were friends. I raised my son alone. My wife, God rest her soul, died a year after he was born. She was in poor health. She couldn't get pregnant for a long time, and then a miracle happened. You can't call it anything else." Catherine looked with undisguised tenderness at this frail old man, in whose eyes there was so much worldly wisdom that her heart shrank with sadness at the sight of such a warm welcome. Catherine realized that Boris Gary had long lacked simple human companionship. No wonder with such a daughter-in-law ignoring him. "She's furious that Dana signed everything over to me shortly before he died, as if he had a premonition that I was the only one who would stay out of the business. Andrew Clive I trust, he's my think tank, and the exec was a firm friend of my son's every day. Andrew almost went to jail. He was young, hot, but he stood his ground and stayed free. He didn't serve much in the army, but he was smart. How did he look in the water? You can see what a noble businessman he turned out to be," the man added. Catherine nodded in agreement. To tell the truth, she liked Andrew Clive at first sight. A real man and a man of his word, not like that slippery Stanley. From then on, Catherine began to work as a nurse. Albina tried to get her on her side at first, but then gave up, thinking that Catherine was as crazy as her father-in-law. But Catherine worked, not interfering where her opinion was not asked. She could not sit idle with a sick person, and in her spare time cleaned the house, washed dishes, and even tidied up overgrown weeds in the flower beds. Here she is, a real housewife, a closet, not like Albina or the lazy one. I'll have to give Andrew a hint, get him to pay attention. He's having bad luck with one or the other, and he has to give each one a piece of his business pie. "Hey, young and green," Boris whispered to Gary and grimaced with pain. He touched the left side of his chest with the palm of his hand. All this Catherine did not know, and simply worked in the late businessman's house for the common good. One morning, rushing to work, she saw a small puppy, who hid behind the trash cans out of fear, and quietly whimpered while people indifferently passed by, with each passing minute losing trust in the eyes of the little creature. "Wow, what a little guy. How did you end up here?" Catherine said with a smile. "Let me take you with me. It's a big house. I hope they won't chase you away." Is it necessary to say how happy Boris Gary was when he saw a small fluffy gift behind the nurse's back? Oh my God, what a miracle. It's just unbelievable. It's so round, it's so cute. A little bear. That'll be your nickname, Bear. Now I'll feed you and give you some milk. You do not look that I'm a pensioner in a t-shirt, but I know the trick. With a smile, looking at the joyful old man, Catherine felt an inexplicable burst of energy. Perhaps this is the best gratitude for her work, when the patient feels good, and you feel good. Deciding to go to the kitchen to cook something delicious, Catherine had already pulled the doorknob when involuntarily heard someone's voices. One of them was male, obviously familiar to her earlier, but the female undoubtedly belonged to Boris Gary's sister-in-law, Albina. But how could it be? "I'm already tired of waiting and drinking cognac to the morgue attendants," said the male voice. "What a bunch of cowards. They want to take money for one thing," Albina said grumpily. "But you, Stanley, are not much of a helper. Is it easy for you to reason on the spot? You're a surgeon, a medical worker. But what would it take for you to make friends with the paramedics and commit a body to the ground without an autopsy? I'm risking my head here. You see, that old man is a devil. He's sick, but he notices everything. Even when I drugged Dennis, I was less afraid, but it was more serious than that. You know, he fell asleep at the wheel and almost went to the zone." Albina interrupted. Albina's interlocutor backed down. Okay, don't get hysterical. Be careful, don't be nervous. He'll go away soon. The heart is not iron, and all of us with you will leave." He tried to calm her down. Catherine literally took a breath from all heard. What are they talking about? And the voice. She definitely heard it before. Wait, Stanley's a surgeon. Oh my God, that's her ex-fiancé. Catherine immediately felt like opening the kitchen door, since she had already realized that Albina and her lover were talking on a video link. What a creep, and Stanley's good too. See where he's gone. He wants to take a rich widow for a spin. I guess his parents' money isn't enough, Catherine thought. Her first thought was to tell Boris Gary everything as it was, but seeing how he calmly fiddling with little Michael, Catherine abandoned this idea. What's the good news? Grandfather will become ill. And what then? Resuscitate him again? No, that's not an option. You don't put a bullet in the same funnel twice. Everyone knows that. So Catherine took the desperate step of telling Andrew in person. What's the big deal? He is, after all, without 5 minutes nephew of the grandfather. So let him help in any way he can. Having appointed a meeting in a cafe, Catherine began to look forward to the evening. But as it turned out, the coming day presented the nurse with another shocking news which Catherine told her. None other than the family notary, Victor Stevenson. After spending about an hour in Boris Gary's room, he left with a look of intense concern on his face. At first the notary, as if nothing had happened, walked past Catherine, then turned around, came close and shook her hand. Congratulations, Catherine. My client made a will in your favor. What client? Catherine didn't understand. Boris Gary, who else? Upon his death, you will become sole owner of all financial assets. However, with one reservation, Andrew Clive will be your trustee and consultant in case of separation of the business, the notary patiently explained. Why do I need these honors? I'm not a relative, I'm just an outsider, Catherine objected. But Victor Stevenson had already bowed and, wishing her a good day, hurried to the exit. Catherine's head was literally spinning from the abundance of information, wills, inheritance, poisoning ex-fiancé. God, why should she do all this? Is not it possible to live a quiet, unnoticeable life of an ordinary cleaner? So thought Catherine, rushing to meet Andrew to her great relief. The businessman took the information calmly, making a few notes in his notebook. Then he thought intensely for about 10 minutes, after which he said, "But now a lot of things make sense to me, and I was wondering how Danis could fall asleep at the wheel. But Albina, she's a snake. And there's a lot of crime here. His father disowned him, so he turned to crime. They treat various gangsters at home for a small fee. Well, it's time to get the authorities involved. I don't worry about the inheritance. Boris Gary already called me and explained everything during the month you worked for him. It's like he's reborn. He's got a new lease on life, you know. So he decided to take a risk and go ahead with the surgery. If things went badly, he insured himself with a will. Albina wouldn't get a penny if he died. Boris Gary has long suspected her of lying, especially after she could not get pregnant for 3 years from Dennis, and then in her room contraceptives were found. So Albina is a fraud. Catherine listened to Andrew and did not believe. Maybe all this is a dream. It was enough to pinch herself by the hand, as everything disappeared into the harsh reality, like a cloud of vapor. But she decided to bide her time and rely on Andrew's wits. Looking ahead, it's safe to say he didn't let her down. Private investigators have collected on Albina so much dirt that she was promised 30 years in prison. Boris Gary kept his word, and in the treatment went to the end, agreeing to conduct heart surgery. Throughout the course of treatment, Andrew and Catherine did not leave him a step away from him. Thanks to modern techniques and the talent of American doctors, the operation was successful, and now the doctors were promising Boris Gary a long life. "No, dear, I do not need long. I just need to wait for grandchildren. And you can go to God with feeling," said Grandpa. He looked conspiratorially at Andrew and Catherine, who had become his nearest and dearest people. At their feet was spinning Michael, and in the room sounded the ringing laughter of the nurse and the businessman, who decided to link their lives together. After all they had been through together, Boris Gary smiled back. After all, he knew that from now on in their lives, everything would be completely different.